Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to Yu-Gi-Oh! And video game news. Today is Wednesday, March the 1st. So it's a new season, new month. I spent an extra day and basically wasted an extra day trying to get up to Platinum so that then I'd only fall back down to Gold. Didn't succeed, only made it to Gold level 1 when I needed to be at Platinum level 5. So I did accomplish all of this battle pass, which has 41 more days, but unfortunately now in ranked I am back to silver 5. Now it might not really be that hard to jump back to gold from that point, but yeah, it was a waste of a day and it didn't really help any. Ideally, if this is a month that has perhaps fewer festivals, then we could focus more going from silver to gold to platinum, and if we could even get to diamond, that would be great, but that's probably asking too much. Best case scenario, we get to platinum 5 this month and then work our way up there, unless I just build a new deck or get really better at playing. They've added some new accessories. We'll go in there and buy that just to get rid of it. They've added some new solo mode content. If anything, it's starting to feel like with this month, Yu-Gi-Oh! It's finally making this more like a mobile game. Compared to my favorite lewd game, Destiny Child, that I play on my cell phone with anime waifus in it. Like, every 2 weeks you're getting a whole new event and more content and more things for them to sell. You could really spend thousands of dollars easily in Destiny Child if you were so inclined, but you don't really need to. Yu-Gi-Oh! Terrible at that. You couldn't spend $1,000 in this game realistically if you tried. There's not enough to buy. There's not events happening that enough to make you focused in the game long enough. Apparently there's this new tryout duels for a short period of time. It's going to be from March 1st to March 5th. Which, if anything, maybe they are correcting for the fact that there's been too many festivals and the festivals have kind of sucked. We don't even have a daily quest to do solo modes yet, which is fine because we'll get like one daily quest to do solo modes and just hold on to that. It's a new month to potentially try and log in every day of the 31 days of the month. We've got a new Duel live and nothing else new. So, yeah. It's a lot of setup, frankly, for unnecessary things that should be pretty obvious. We have 7 days in which we could spend something on that. And so there's a thought to there. So you get a protector, go ahead and just purchase that. And the only reason we're really purchasing these is just to what is protector, it says. Not what is a protector, just what is protector. Just trying to make sure we have everything out of laziness. And then you have a card case, which is not what is card case. Man, the translation is poor. And this is just an artistic card box. It doesn't change the gameplay at all. Yep. So now we are back to just having everything purchased. And we have 26 days left to potentially purchase more of these packs. Which maybe there is an argument for that. Like we are missing a decent amount of these cards, and I do have enough gems, so let's just think about that for a second. Secret packs 26, 20, 26 days. Yeah, normal packs. Like in 7 days, this would potentially go away as far as a selection pack. So there is an argument on opening this too, but not as good of an argument really as opening this. So let's open just 10 packs of this. Hope we get an ultra rare. We got 2. And we call that. For the accountability section, my schedule's just really crazy, and I've just had a ton of new stuff added to my plate. So I'm not really getting a lot done, and it doesn't look like that's going to change for at least probably 3 or 4 more weeks. So I would just effectively give up on this month too. I do need to make some YouTube shorts after this stream because I'm about to run out of YouTube shorts for one time slot. Ooh, that is definitely a card that I would want. Now these are the pickup like kind of decks where you only get 4 of that specific kind of cards, and you're just getting 4 of generic prize pool cards. So yeah, I did manage to play 1 episode of Prey earlier this morning. My sleep schedule is also totally crazy. It's weirdly getting back to too close to waking up at like 6 in the morning and going to bed at like 10 p.m. But it's still very much like waking up at 4 in the morning and then going to sleep and having a nap in the middle of the afternoon, and then waking up at like 10 in the evening and then going back to sleep again. As for Prey, the one thing nice I can say about it is that it has magically made me just completely forget about the last few games I've played. So much so that I didn't even really remember when I tried to think about it. The tract of people in spacesuits games, which is what I was following, as I'd played multiple games where there was a character in a spacesuit, and Prey really just boiled down into being a generic first-person shooter to the point where I didn't even remember that. I don't know what the yellow Willy means. Is it 1 guaranteed super rare? I guess that's what that means. We're opening a ton of secret packs. But otherwise, I really don't have a lot of nice things to say about Prey. I looked at the achievements and it just kind of spoiled the fact that I have... The game really wants you to play it like 3 or 4 times. And even if you had a new game plus experience like Resident Evil 4, where the second time is even easier, I'm not sure there's enough content there to justify playing it that often or that many times. And that really is expecting a lot. What was the exclamation point here all about? Well, it's gone now. Let's see. So this wouldn't really be a good good one to go after, and I question honestly whether the cosmic mechanical entities here for 100 packs isn't just this. That would explain the thing. So now they're just kind of like cycling in secret packs, so you don't even have to unlock them. Interesting. But that might actually be very helpful. We can certainly look at some of these other packs and see if maybe there's a good candidate amongst them. This isn't a terrible candidate, but it's not a great candidate either. This one should probably be a terrible candidate, unless you're just really looking for those cards. No, not terrible. One of the things I thought about Prey, in particular, that I was just saying when I was recording my pre-recorded footage, is it really feels like there probably should be a balanced system where the mimics appear more and more in the areas, and then they move towards merging into each other to make larger types of enemies like phantoms. Instead, what you get is you'll have areas where there's just a phantom, which always makes noise and is very easy to see coming, or you'll have mimics. Maybe you'll have a situation where there's a few mimics and a phantom, but that's pretty much it. Yeah. I don't think this one would be as good of a candidate to go with going forward. Like, this selection pack would give me a higher chance, certainly, but I think we leave everything at that, and we could open a bonus pack. We've now got quite a few bonus packs because I was playing extra, which I think that probably highlights an issue too, where only 2 new cards, and new to me cards, really, not new cards. These are all incredibly old cards. Yeah, I really am just not feeling Prey that much. It, to me, feels like they didn't steal enough from BioShock, or they tried to differentiate themselves from BioShock a little too much and lost some good elements. But even in a vacuum, Prey has these mimics, and its main gimmick is that mimics can mimic other objects and jump scare you if you get too close. You immediately remove that element once you have the scanner chip that can just scan the area, but then that creates a Batman Arkham Asylum scan mode that you spend 90% of your gameplay in. I wonder almost if that was maybe like DLC or something, and I bought like the deluxe edition of Prey with Moon Crash DLC, and I definitely question the Moon Crash DLC making it even less likely you would get all the achievements. That as a separate thought. But yeah, I do kind of question if maybe you wouldn't have had the scanner chip if you just bought the base game, and the game would have been better if that was the case. That being said, the jump scares would have gotten very boring anyways, and the wrench combat really doesn't work. I did pull the trigger and infuse 4 of the alien DNA mods, and at 4 I now am going to be attacked by turrets, which doesn't really change much. Like, there's far too few turrets and they're far too weak anyways in the game. So like, you can pretty much play the first half of the game just letting turrets be broken by enemies and aliens, and then put the alien DNA in yourself and they'll be broken by the time you get to that point. but one of the achievements and the description of the ability, Mind Jack, actually directly says that's how you free humans from being mentally controlled by aliens. Which, okay. Now that I know that that's the case, that does tell me what I was doing may not work as an alternate option. I guess I could probably try this a different way, but whatever. I'll stick to the boring, safe way of doing this. I could have brought the Trident out, destroyed this face-up card, discarded my characters who has 1700 health into the graveyard, then used the first character I summoned to bring it out of the graveyard as side by side, so it would get a bonus. One of the other things I've noticed about Prey, and I'll stop talking about Prey pretty quickly here, is that the level design is pretty bad. It feels a lot like Deus Ex Human Revolution, where they try to make a few different ways in which you can get into an area, but none of it really feels nicely polished, because they have to then think of 3 different ways that you might be able to get into an area, instead of just having one door and one exit and having everything on a flat 2D play field, and not trying to add verticality and not trying to add secret tunnels. So yeah, it's a shame overall that in all the games I've covered, very rarely have I come across something that has drastically changed my opinion of the game after the first couple hours. That's not super surprising, because if you're not putting your best foot forward, most people aren't going to see that content anyways. But yeah, like adding the camera in BioShock was probably a mistake, and Prey has almost the exact same concept, and the idea of scanning things, which all of that comes from Metroid Prime, and in all fairness, like, Metroid Prime probably should have been the only game that got away with doing that, making a game where you're scanning things. In particular, when you think about the number of things that you would need to scan and the number of times you would need to scan something in Metroid Prime compared to a modern game, which is going to be 3, 4, 5 times as large, with 3, 4, 5 times as many enemies on amongst its zoology or roster of enemies. Those kinds of concepts break down. Also, Metroid Prime is an old game, so we are increasingly getting into this point where if you're trying to make a game that's like System Shock, which is an old game, if you're trying to make a game that's like BioShock, which is a slightly less old game but still an old game, if you're trying to make a game that's a lot like Resident Evil 4, like, all of those games have concepts and nostalgia around them, but there needs to be people willing to break the mold and say, hey, some of this stuff really does not work in modern times and modern gameplay. It's just not what gamers are looking for. And that's not inherently to say that every game should look like a modern game or turn into a live service game or something like that, which is what's getting promoted, but some things probably do need to be changed. If I was going to make Metroid Prime today, there would be considerably larger areas with less doorways and less cavernous type places, and there might be a lot of more visual elements, but it would be a mistake to double or triple the number of animals you had to scan in Metroid Prime. There would probably need to be maybe 2 or 3 new abilities at most. I wouldn't want to go too crazy, though, if I was remaking Metroid Prime, and if it was really just a remake that was staying true instead of just making a Metroid Prime today as if there never had been a Metroid Prime in the past. I wouldn't add any new content like that, new weapons. Obviously, if you were making Metroid Prime today, you would write better story and have voice acting for Samus Aran. You'd have more humanoid type characters that you would talk to and interact with. You would have quest givers. You would look at the limitations that the GameCube had and work around those now non-existent limitations. And that's definitely something that just doesn't really feel like happened with Prey. Like, it doesn't feel like they were that ambitious or that free to try something new, as much as they were just pitching a game that says, hey, this is going to be like BioShock but set in space. But in all fairness, it let Arcane Software actually make a game, whereas I wouldn't be surprised if Bethesda was straight up not going to let them make a game at all otherwise, and just have them work on the next Elder Scrolls or Elder Scrolls Online or whatever big ticket sellers. Even when you look at like Fallout 4, it doesn't feel like there was too much ambition there, other than the settlement technology and the power suits being more of a permanent suit of armor. The actual story seemed fairly generic, and gameplay seemed for the most part the same. It's probably a little premature to do that, but whatever. Okay, set this. Summon this. This would do 19 damage at the moment, so we're best off attacking here. I will say, as far as wrapping up the accountability section, I tried to use the YouTube Studio app, and it wouldn't let me log into my account for a second. It said an error happened, and I was like, uh-oh, here it goes. There's been these waves of YouTubers getting their channels stolen. Although it mostly seems like it's cookie stealing by installing an app either on your phone or your computer, and you still have to effectively download and run a program. So yeah, and it's mostly through people clicking links through phishing emails, which fortunately I don't even have business contacts labeled or anything like that on my YouTube channel, so I don't have anybody trying to contact me with sponsorships, nor would I really want to agree to a sponsorship at this point. I think I'm far too small of a character to make an argument that I should be doing sponsorships. But once I did get it was able to log in. It seems like I got another boost of maybe 8 new subscribers in a couple of days, which is nice. So the number of subscribers is going up and up, which sadly just then turns my focus towards the watch time, which is not really that high. It definitely feels like, even if it's a snowball effect, and in less than a year from now I have over 1,000 subscribers, which that's, I mean, it could be way earlier than that if it actually was a snowball effect. The amount of watch time still could be a major issue. And honestly, having 2 or 3,000 subscribers before having the watch time up might be a smarter move. And inevitably, something's going to go wrong. Something's going to be surprisingly different if I did get back into the YouTube partner program, as far as just like commercial ad rates and something being way lower. But honestly, I would be happy with even getting like $1 a month through ads, because it's something to move forward and try to improve upon, at least. Where being stuck at $0 a month is demoralizing. I feel like there was something else I wanted to mention, but I don't think I can even remember it. Let's see. So now that I am following Steam Deck on Twitter, these are the top 20 games of February that were played on Steam Deck, which gives you, I guess, a slightly different list. Hogwarts Legacy, Elden Ring. Elden Ring just announced some DLC. We'll talk about that later. Vampire Survivors, Red Dead Redemption 2, Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, GTA 5, Skyrim, Hades, Brotato. Not sure I've heard of that one. Persona 5 Royale, Monster Hunter Rise, Binding of Isaac Rebirth, Fallout 4, Cyberpunk 2077, Valheim, Slay the Spire, Marvel's Midnight Suns, 2K, NBA 2K23, and Project Zomboid. Here's a long-running game that you can put hours and hours into. Same is true here, probably true here, possibly true here, possibly true here, definitely true here, definitely true here, definitely true there, definitely true there, definitely true there. I need to actually play. I actually don't know how long Hogwarts Legacy actually is. Elden Ring, you could probably put a decent amount of time into it. Stardew Valley, sure. I think inherently the pattern you would take from this, besides this just being a list of very popular games, this is sorted by the number of hours played, sorted by playtime, which I guess that means Hogwarts Legacy had the most amount of playtime. Interesting. If anything, though, I suspect that is a major aspect as far as the Steam Deck goes, in that you probably aren't going to get the most out of your Steam Deck if you're playing a short 5-hour game here and there, or multiple short 5-hour games. You're probably going to get the most of it via the longer running games. Binding of Isaac Rebirth, great example of that. Something you could play that for hours and hours every day, and it probably wouldn't even drain your battery too much. Notably, also, when you think about the Steam Deck, unless you're playing with it plugged in, which I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people are, you're only going to get like 4 to maybe 9 hours out of a Steam Deck per charge. So, yeah, you already, in purchasing it, are recognizing that it is a device with a battery, and that creates its own problems. Certainly. I wanted to show off this cosplayer. This is the first Alloy cosplayer I've ever seen, that I recall, at least. And it's funny because I've often complained about the kind of fat, chubby face model that the game presents Alloy in the second game of her series. And honestly, the hair and makeup and face of this cosplayer looks pretty much the same, and yet there's just not that same chubbiness around the cheeks and forehead, and it looks like a little bit more of a normal human, or what you would expect from a model's appearance, not a average human. So yeah, it's definitely not really fair to compare a live person's doing cosplay of a character and the 3D modeling of a character, except for the fact that the 3D modeling of the character in Alloy was based on a live person in the first place, a 3D scan, and then modified from there. And if there is perhaps people making arguments that the chubbier faced characters that we're starting to see more and more of is just moving towards a realistic situation, and that the depictions of characters in video games in the past have been like completely unrealistic and impossible standards, I don't think that's a fair argument to make, because yes, most skinny models are unnaturally skinny, but they are humans, and in their humanity they actually do look like that. And sure, I will grant you that a lot of models are smoking a lot of cigarettes and anorexic and not eating anything, but not that I'm accusing this cosplayer of that by any means. I'm just saying, with enough effort, whether it's healthy or not, humans can look like the 3D models we have seen before of Alloy. Alloy, even in the first game, looked perfectly fine. So it's strange to have her plump up. And I never heard anything spoiling the story, so if there was actually some reason why they changed the face model, I never really heard anything to it, which perhaps they should have mentioned that if that was going to be the case. There you go, we should win there. Should we activate this effect? Sure, special summon somebody. I've apparently shifted my channel, I guess, a little bit more to talking about video game cosplay, whereas I wasn't ever really mentioning it a few weeks ago. I guess my focus just shifted a little bit. I really didn't actively think about it. It definitely has a lot to do with just a lot of other people leaving Twitter and leaving me only to see the cosplayers left. It is a subculture, a spin-off culture of video game fandom, in that you would dress up as a character from a video game. Some cosplayers in the past have made arguments that cosplayers should only embody and cosplay characters they really have an emotional attachment to. I don't think I would hold most cosplayers to that strict requirement, though, personally. Let's go ahead and activate this. And hope we can do something. Shuffle a card into the deck. This is a waste of a card to do this, but whatever. Actually, I shouldn't have done that. I should have targeted a different card. That actually would have made a lot more sense. Alright, well. Unless we somehow just lose miserably here, I think we can win. So yeah, you have to really highlight a level of skill in cosplay here too, because very often you'll all see lewd cosplayers that would just put on a red wig and have something vaguely similar to the outfit of a character like Alloy. But clearly this is somebody who's done some sewing and fabric work, or had somebody else do the sewing and fabric work. They've looked at the game, they've tried to make their design look like that. They have a full-on bow that looks like it's been painted to match. But yeah, you got bracers, you've got an elbow guard, you've got a skirt, you've got leather things. It's a decent actual costume for cosplay. Inevitably though, a lot of it is all just focused around when you are a lead cosplayer showing off the skin. And yeah, this is more of a boudoir picture that's been photoshopped. And if anything, I think this is kind of a great example of contrast, in that this is a kind of terrible photo as far as the color palette. It's all in these red tones and brown tones. Even if you are showing off skin here, you're getting the red tones and the brown tones here, and you're not really showing off that much. You would think you would at least lose the leggings or lose the skirt or something here for that. By comparison, this is a much better cosplay photo and just photograph in general. Half of this frankly looks like it might be done computer generated even on the faces. But yeah, here you have a natural setting and background and natural lighting, or natural looking lighting. You have a better pose. So I would definitely say go for that first one, particularly if you're interested in actually cosplaying the character from the video game. Now, if you are just trying to push people to an OnlyFans, then the other one might sell more OnlyFans subscriptions. Although inherently there is also this danger. If you were a cosplayer who is willing to do some lewd imagery but doesn't want to get straight into just doing softcore porn, there is just this danger that you would get into something like OnlyFans and be further and further pushed towards showing more and more extreme photos and moving closer and closer to softcore porn and away from cosplaying. Inherently, in my mind too, there is just a certain level of lewdness in cosplay in general that makes almost this drawing line where there are definitely characters where you could dress up as I'm thinking like Bulma from Dragon Ball Z, and you'd be pretty much clothed from head to toe, and you could do that at age 14, 15, 16 as a female cosplayer. Male cosplayers can basically be covered head to toe at any age, because there's very few lewd male cosplayers out there, and very few good male cosplayers at all that I've seen, although I'm not particularly looking for that either. But yeah, there is this odd dividing line in which an 8-year-old can go on Halloween and dress up in a costume, and technically that would be costume play under some very wide definitions. But if you were going to an anime convention or a video game convention, I really wouldn't want to see an 8-year-old in their Halloween costume running around and them entering tournaments and them thinking of themselves as being cosplayers in the same way. And it does create this weird split where a lot of conventions do have like a adults only cosplay event, and then they have more of a family friendly cosplay event earlier in the event, or they draw a line one way or the other. And that is to not even touch upon the cosplay is not consent movement, which on the face of it is something that almost anyone can agree with, that even if you are in a lewd outfit that is showing off a lot of your skin, doesn't mean you're allowing any random stranger to come up and grope you. Of course, at a certain point you are consenting, and you kind of have to admit to be ogled and looked at when you're presenting yourself by any random person. That is a line you have to admit to yourself, certainly. So that if you're going to show cleavage, the kind of guys you want to see your cleavage also are going to be right next to the guys that you probably don't want to show your cleavage to. Anyways, none of that has anything to do with video games. That's just cosplay stuff. I probably shouldn't be talking about it at all. It can't go anywhere. Like I can't. I'm not turning my channel into something about that. I don't even think those channels inherently consistently succeed on YouTube. So let's talk about some actual video game news now that I'm a little bit warmed up. Forspoken's developer Luminous Productions is going to be merged into Square Enix. Into Square Enix. The studio is currently working on Forspoken DLC. What's funny here is it seems like this is the exact opposite of what we've seen of other video game companies, where a game comes out, it's not particularly very successful, and I think that would be a fair assessment of Forspoken, and then Square Enix blames them and cuts ties with them. At this point, though, Square Enix may have no more people to cut ties with, or perhaps this is a case where Square Enix Holdings, which oversees all the company's business, including the gaming, publishing, manga, film, merchandise, etc., has said, well, the gaming division that has been a real problem, and the publishing division of Square Enix, what we would commonly think of as Square Enix from a video game perspective, maybe they've just messed up so much that this is a merger in which Luminous is taking over. On the other hand, it's a little bit more believable that this is a merger that will then be followed by a lot of redundancies and layoffs. And this is just Square Enix Holdings trying to save face as they once again have to are going to get rid of their talent effectively in favor of sticking to the incredibly untalented publishing and part of Square Enix, who have done terrible jobs. Of course, this also, if there was ever a company I would imagine might just be rolling the dice and to figure out what it's going to do, I wouldn't be surprised if that is Square Enix. I wouldn't be surprised if they literally flipped a coin as far as, do we sell off Luminous or do we merge with it? Oh, this is bad. I can't activate that. Like the quote here, if you're to believe it, Says the merger is part of the company's effort to further bolster the competitive prowess of the group's development studios, a goal set forth under its current medium-term business strategy. The question I really want to ask, and I always look at things like this from a very xenophobia perspective, is Luminous a Japanese company, and thus Square Enix as a Japanese company is merging with another Japanese company, and that's why they're being treated differently than the two companies that were instead just kicked to the curb by Square Enix and eventually were bought by Embracer Group, although inherently it probably also, what Embracer Group was able to do with the two companies that it purchased showed Square Enix that they were doing, that they were underutilizing those companies. Let's see, beginning on May 1st, our talented team will join Square Enix to deliver new innovative gaming experiences to players across the globe. Let's see, there's a whole bunch more here. Forspoken, though, is currently at a 64 on Metacritic for PS5 and a 63 for PC. Yeah. So I'm going to do a little research here. Let's see if we can find out where Luminous Productions is. Wikipedia. Yeah. Looking at Wikipedia here. Luminous Productions, also known as Kabushiki Gaisha Ruminasu Production, that's probably pronounced Productions, almost certainly, is a Japanese video game studio and subsidiary of Square Enix. It was originally known as Business Division 2, which was the developmental team for Final Fantasy XV, and was one of the 12 business divisions, internal development and production divisions that Square Enix had at the time before the company considered its consolidated its development in 2020. So it was always a subsidiary, it was always a Japanese company, and noticeably it also is known for Final Fantasy XV, which this probably does make a good chance that Luminous Productions was given their own name and their own autonomy, or a small amount of autonomy, to make Forspoken, and failed. This really probably is a punishment, and now it's going to be merged back into Square Enix, and whatever talent they keep is probably going to be forced to just work on the next Final Fantasy game, which would be exactly in line with what I suspect Square Enix was going to do, and what I've said in the past I think Square Enix is likely to do, which is just make all of its focus on Final Fantasy games. Elden Ring's first expansion, Shadow of the Erdtree, has been announced. From Software promises new adventures in the lands between. I wasn't 100% sure. It really hadn't occurred to me that they would have made any DLC for Elden Ring, because in the past I don't think has been a ton of DLC for Dark Souls or Bloodborne. Okay. Let's activate this effect. and then activate this effect. And then get rid of 2 cards from the graveyard that way. That's a slightly better strategy. But still not really a good enough strategy. I have lost. These are all Video Games Chronicles articles, by the way, in case I forgot to mention it. Xbox is now bringing PC Game Pass to 40 new countries for the first time. The preview version is available in these regions starting today. So, there's a long list here of countries. It's not particularly a video game specific issue, but the UK is trying to pass a law that would demand devices with end-to-end encryption like Signal or WhatsApp, those kinds of communication apps, to add in a spying layer to look for, well, they always say it's child porn, or CSAM, child sexual abuse material, but inherently there's very little way to successfully put some kind of algorithm or program on a specific device like a cell phone to scan your photos first based off of some database that would have to be provided by the government. Thus the government would have some kind of control over it and be able to put in fake matches and false matches at any point. But yeah, doing that on the device to then encrypt a message that the app then deemed acceptable to encrypt and send, to then send that encrypted message off to its final recipient, like that's not really going to work. The devices aren't strong enough, and so inherently the only way you could really follow the letter of these laws would be to put in a backdoor and de-encrypt the end-to-end encryption, which is what they really want to do and see happen. And then any level of security and any level of hacker might be able to, or not any level, but a certain level of people would be able to break into that back door, and a certain level of hacker would be. So you're just adding vulnerabilities. And in particular, if you are trying to prevent the distribution of illegal material, end-to-end encryption should be really the last type of app to target. There's no reason to target end-to-end encryption because Signal and WhatsApp don't have major broadcast capabilities. Having not used Signal or WhatsApp, I don't even know if you can send the same message to multiple people as like a group message. Like, if that was kind of the case that you could send out group messages, that still wouldn't be anywhere as much as like a website or a torrent or file sharing system. And there's major problems, certainly. One government passes a law for that material, and then right around the anniversary of Tiananmen Square, which happened just a couple days ago, yeah, China would put in something saying, yeah, you've got to filter out any mention of Tiananmen Square or anything negative we want to say. Russia literally just fined Wikipedia for not publishing Russian propaganda, and instead reporting on what most people would agree is the truth. So there's all kinds of countries around the world and that would use that precedent to force other things to be censored and force security to be weakened. If anything, this UK law, which was introduced by Boris Johnson, highlights how very much the UK still has a lot of remnants of totalitarianism, if I can say that word. A lot more than you would think, because in part the actual people of the UK are sheep, for lack of a better term. They like to fall in line. They like to have uniformity. The people that wanted freedom and lack of censorship, they all left for America at a certain point, or left for other countries, and that did leave the conformist and the strict things. When you look at V for Vendetta, and you would almost think that couldn't possibly happen as an American, but it totally could happen. Not just in the UK, but elsewhere too. Anyways, yeah, I'm kind of rambling again. Next story from Video Games Chronicles: the Beyond Good and Evil 2 studio head reportedly has exited amid labor investigations. Authorities are said to be concerned about staff sickness and burnout at Ubisoft Montpellier. So Montpellier, is that in Canada? He's been absent since the turn of the year. His exit followed 3 sources. Alright, let's play. Do this. While we're doing this, we will also do this. There we go. Yeah, 3 sources to the site said his exit followed a year in which dozens of developers took extended leave for stress and sickness as the studio continued to struggle with development of Beyond Good and Evil 2. Beyond Good and Evil 2 was teased in 2008. Then it was followed by a decade of silence until it resurfaced in 2017, nearly a decade, I guess. This is an interesting way for somebody to, I guess, be laid off. Maybe this has a lot to do with Montpellier being a Canadian thing, I think. Or maybe it's a French company. Ubisoft overall is a French company, but yeah, I think that's a Canadian office. There's no getting around it, though. At a certain level, you do have this obvious problem with the development of Beyond Good and Evil 2, in that it really is more a vaporware concept than an actual game that they're having real levels of success making. Let's see what happens if we... I can't do anything there. That was a mistake, but whatever. The personally, and I know there are definitely some people who loved Beyond Good and Evil 2. Honestly, I'm not sure if it wasn't a lot of mainstream video game journalists overall that loved Beyond Good and Evil 2. It's just such an old game, and it really didn't feel like it needed a sequel. Let's just attack and win. There's kind of no way we're going to lose here. I really just don't think it felt like it needed a sequel. And what they were teasing and showing actually wasn't really a sequel to Beyond Good and Evil 2. Anyways, you could basically have made any game and it would have, by a different name, and it could have had similar elements to Beyond Good and Evil 2. In a funny way, I guess Beyond Good and Evil 2 being ahead of the pack, like far ahead of the idea of just remaking games, paved the way not to go, that paved the wrong path. Whereas it would make a lot of sense right now for Beyond Good and Evil 2 to be cancelled and for them to instead just say, we're remaking Beyond Good and Evil 1. We know the plot points of Beyond Good and Evil 1. We know the story of that. We're going to remake that. We're going to make it in modern graphics and reintroduce and reboot the whole series. And then Beyond Good and Evil 2 at this point is on hold. And we will completely start a whole new development for Beyond Good and Evil 2 if this remake of Beyond Good and Evil 1 succeeds. Of course, you didn't have the other problem of Ubisoft itself just falling apart. You also have a problem, though, of probably some pretty, I hate to call them lazy workers or bad workers, but I think at this point Ubisoft probably is full of a lot of either we've got the union cough, slow working, and we're not really trying that hard mentality. Like, I would heavily suspect that is in part what's happening at Ubisoft, and morale at Ubisoft is just incredibly low. We have gone from, as a gamer, not wanting Vivendi or Viacom, I forget which one it was, to acquire Ubisoft, to now thinking maybe they should have acquired Ubisoft, that they would have been better off in that case. But yeah, Ubisoft as a company has fallen to pieces, and its morale of its employees is incredibly low, and its CEO is shooting his mouth off, saying a lot of dumb things, and it definitely seems like it's a case that Yves Guillemot, the CEO of Ubisoft, has moved a lot of talent and moved his sons over to a separate company, and there was just this pathetic shell of Ubisoft left, making the occasional Assassin's Creed game and pretending like they're making Beyond Good and Evil 2. Inherently, if you only care about the development of Beyond Good and Evil 2, you now know it is really not any further to being finished than it was 2 years ago, I imagine. It's probably not anywhere closer to being finished than 10 years ago. There's a whole bunch of controversies on top of the ones I've already mentioned around Beyond Good and Evil 2. It is a little ridiculous to say any employee is so bad that he's actually causing people to be sick or stressed, but particularly from the United States perspective, that's not something people would buy into. But honestly, it's probably pretty true. Like, I've had bad bosses that definitely have made me more stressed, and more stressed has made me more sick, certainly. So I could see that happening, I could also see a lot of bad bosses just pushing people to saying, hey, I'm just going to take sick leave because I can. Or stress leave because I can, because this guy's such a jerk and he actually is stressing it. It's just bad leadership. Not that I inherently believe a good leader would just cause people to be healthier. On the other hand, this might be very much a case where they're firing their manager and making up a kind of ridiculous excuse, or they're firing a manager just because people naturally got sick. It inherently is not really a manager's job to make sure his employees don't get sick. That's a ridiculous desire. It's a manager's job to have staffed up and had enough redundant staff to adjust for somebody being sick. And that's something no business really wants to admit to or do. The problem with this kind of story, though, is this is just another cherry on top of a very large sundae as far as nothing, non-announcements as far as Beyond Good and Evil 2 actually coming out or being made. It does just seem like it is a case of drama for no reason. Let's see. Next Video Games Chronicle article we have. Obsidian's game directors thinks a Fallout New Vegas remaster would be, quote, awesome. Fallout co-creators Tim Kaine and Leonard Boyarsky recently directed The Outer Worlds. Which, yeah. I should check to see if I have own The Outer Worlds, actually. Let's see. Let me do a little quick search here. I probably don't own the game. Yeah. Nope, it is on my wish list, but I don't own it, and they've just announced Spacer's Choice Edition, which would replace, I guess, this non-mandatory corporate sponsored bundle. So, yeah. I haven't played Fallout New Vegas. I do know I own Fallout New Vegas. And so I could play Fallout New Vegas at any point in the next year or two, and then follow that up with the Outer Worlds, and that would be a good logical connection. Although in all fairness, if I was going to play Fallout New Vegas, that would take a lot of time. I'd probably want to play at least one or two other games as a spacer, then play the Outer Worlds. So at that slow pace, it'd be a very long time, unless somebody just gifted me the Spacer's Choice new version of Outer Worlds. Then that would be relatively, technically, a brand new version of a game, and so I could try make an excuse to move a little bit faster at that point. Not that I can really make any promises. Alright, let's take this one. I think we've got this. If we can summon this, then activate this, toss this, add this, that should get us to 1800. Nope, that got us to 2000. And then summon this. He's got nothing I would imagine he can do here. So, direct attack for 2000. I probably should stop playing at this point. Like, early in the month, yes, you can just constantly get a run of victories. Nobody at this low silver tier is likely to give me much trouble. But if I keep going, I'll just keep on playing. Here we've got several new things. Duel and solo mode, 29 days to finish that. Win 1 duel, pendulum summon, link summon a monster 3 times. So I could play like one more game. I imagine that would work to getting these other daily quests done. 2 of those 3. And then we'll call it a day at that point. The next video games chronicle article we have, Naughty Dog artist says that devs, quote, don't have an excuse, end quote, to ignore authentic black hair in games. Dale Walker previously worked on Suicide Squad, Kill the Justice League, designing Deadshot, which I guess this is the Deadshot they're doing in Suicide Squad, Kill the Justice League. The thing there, as far as my rough knowledge of comic books, is Deadshot was a white character until Will Smith played him in the first Suicide Squad movie, I think. And then I guess he's just been shifted to being a black character, which in all fairness, like, I don't think Deadshot is that interesting of a character that there's a lot of room for complaint there. It would be nice if they created new characters instead of just like race swapping existing characters, but in the comic book world, new characters have severely less chance of succeeding and really aren't going to quickly correct the fact that almost every single comic book character is white for decades without doing some changes there. So yeah, him being race swapped potentially for the movies doesn't really offend me in any way, because most characters in the DC universe and Marvel universe are non-characters anyways. You have to realize and admit that most of these characters are showing up for maybe 2 or 3 issues of a comic book, so maybe 50 pages, but if each comic book is like 20 pages at most, and even at that, it's not even that big of a deal, because how many panels are those characters, or how many lines of dialogues are those characters going to have? Even extremely iconic characters barely have any real personality to them until they start showing up in like cartoons, and that's when you really start to see them have a lot of dialogue and a lot of backstory. And both DC in particular has rebooted characters so many times that a lot of characters don't have any consistent personality at all. Even Batman is generally easily described as his parents are killed. He's a gruff, brooding psychopath chasing after criminals. He claims to be the world's greatest detective, but almost never has a comic around him acting like a detective or investigating at all, instead focusing more on just action and violence. The movies do very little detective work. The TV show did very little detective work. As for the video game aspect and like black hair, which I guess that's fair way to call that, they're right. Like, the hair technology has been solely focused in video games around hair, long flowing hair of women. In all fairness, it's often long flowing hair of like Asian women as much as it is long flowing hair of more European women, but it definitely is looking for like long straight hair that you would expect to see not on black people. And in all fairness, I don't think the technology is that hard either. It might be a little bit harder than it seems at first glance to have curlier hair, but it's not that hard at all. Of course, you ask a Japanese person to make a character with black hair, they are going to inevitably have a gigantic, ridiculous afro, which is not something most black people wear. And certainly if you're starting to talk about like more African tribal haired styles with a whole bunch of beads and braids in it, that may be a level of detail that is too much. Oops. Oh, there goes that card, I guess. There, in fairness, is a lot of games that just do not render visuals at a hyper-realistic style. And when you start to look at the games that are going to just have flat images of hair and not trying to render thousands upon thousands of strands using something like NVIDIA's Hairworks, which is a older technology at this point, a very old technology at this point. Like that kind of hairstyles. Connection failed. Interesting. Well, that is a lot of rewards. I feel like they may have increased the amount of rewards you get too. Alright, well, we won a duel. Apparently we didn't fusion pendulum or link summon anything, which I guess in fairness we didn't, did we? Probably need to make a deck around that. So yeah, you look at this guy's hair. In this type of rendering, seems very doable. But if we started to if you started to do like long flowing dreads with beads and braids, that might be a little bit harder to do. Waves might not render visually particularly well. Big afros probably wouldn't render particularly well. But yeah, there's a certain argument there. Is it the biggest, most important thing to focus on as far as representation? Probably not. But it's something. There is certainly deeper arguments that I'm not one to make as far as if a game developer is just changing the color palette of a skin, but is effectively just making a white man in a white man suit with black skin, that you really aren't representing black culture from many different regions as well as it should be represented. So yeah, that there's always a argument around like code switching and having black characters just be talk and act and react exactly like white characters when they might have a different experience and might have something different to say. They don't always have to have something to say, They don't always have to have big afros. They shouldn't become minstrel shows or just parodies of black people. But yeah, better hair technology overall would be achieved with more of a focus on more variety of hairstyles. There's no way to get around that. And I'll leave it at that. I think we'd already talked about this. Paradox Interactive has partnered with Xbox for a game announcement show, which it'll be interesting to see if that has a particularly different feel from any other Xbox presentation and how many games particularly they're going to talk about. Shigeru Miyamoto says he's confident Nintendo won't change after he leaves. Everyone has an understanding ... of what it is to be Nintendo. Kind of obviously he has to say that. You can see he has gray white hair here, where I think he probably dyes it in other cases. Yeah, he's a pretty old guy, and he will have to retire and leave. The fact that he's even responding to that with anything other than "I won't leave, I'm going to stay here until I die," is a hint that he is moving further towards the idea of retiring. I honestly question how much he's involved in making Mario games per se, instead of just being kind of a manager and making overall big ticket decisions that could be made by someone else. His involvement may very well be very superficial. He may be the Gabe Newell of Nintendo, in that they keep him around as a figurehead more than anything else. Particularly when you think about how he created Super Mario and Legend of Zelda. Well, Zelda Tears of the Sky and Breath of the Wild, nothing like the Legend of Zelda he created originally. It's just a completely different game with the same characters. Super Mario, completely different type of game. Super Mario Bros. 1 compared to Super Mario Odyssey or Mario Odyssey. Although they say he made Super Mario, did he make Mario Brothers, the arcade game? Probably. Other things that he created, Donkey Kong. They're not doing anything with Donkey Kong. F-Zero, they're not doing anything with that. Pikmin has stayed pretty consistent, and we're about to get Pikmin 4, I believe. And then Star Fox, they're not doing anything with that. So most of his creations are either completely different or abandoned. He is really more of a figurehead than anything else. Here, let's see if we can get a bigger picture. You can see it's slightly darker hair here. And speaking again of just hairstyles, I imagine Shigeru Miyamoto does consider, or at least originally considered, Mario to be Japanese, and the whole plumbing thing, and from Brooklyn probably was added later on, around the Super Mario Bros. Super Show cartoon, when they were making pixel versions of Mario, the whole mustache and all of that. But yeah, even if they were doing it, assuming he doesn't really think of Mario as Japanese, which in this example is probably a high possibility, you definitely see from a 1980s era, you've got Luigi with a black mustache and brown hair and being white, Mario, black mustache, brown hair, being white, both having blue eyes, and then Princess Peach here, or Princess Daisy, whichever one, being a white lady with blonde hair. So yeah, there's been a long history of just not underrepresentation of people of color in video games, whether it's their hair or otherwise. Here we can see there's a dark-skinned security guard lady, or whatever. here below the stage, but the presenters are also a Japanese guy, Asian guy, and white guy. There is a bigger argument certainly to say as far as underrepresentation that I really can't name too many non-white game developers in the West at all. Like they're just kind of not there. It is definitely a boys' club and definitely a white boys' club as far as being developing games, and I would much prefer there be more opportunities for game programmers, game testers, game developers than to have token 3D fictional characters with big afros or with black hair depicted in the game, but still have 100% of all of your developers do that. Even Life is Strange highlighted that problem, where you have two white Canadian guys telling the story of a teenage girl and telling it very poorly because it's not the story they lived and experienced. Moving on, March's Xbox Live games with gold titles have been confirmed. Subscribers can claim Truberbrook, Sunstrike 4 Complete Collection, and Lamentum next month. Those are 3 games I do not recognize, which either it's a slow month for March or they're starting to run out of deals they can make or games that they can release. Final Fantasy XVI's producer, quote, would like to release a PC version eventually, but Naoki Yoshida says it definitely won't arrive when the PS5 6-month exclusivity period ends. I believe this is the guy who originally was kind of quoted like waiting for exclusivity to end is killing the industry, and that you should just buy it in the first 6 months, because that did create a bit of controversy, certainly. Like inherently, most game developers probably are severely penalized, or at least not rewarded at all, if you buy a game outside of the 6-month period. And that's a shame. But it does not fall upon the consumer to subsidize or hold up the gaming industry based on unfair standards that a publisher is creating, where the publishers are only looking at the first 6 months of a game's launch. The consumer has to be an advocate for himself and his pocketbook and cannot just constantly buy every game on day one or pre-order games. Some people could do that financially, but they shouldn't do it because it's just going to create unrealistic expectations for game producers. Games, more than movies, even, and TV, are a very long-term product. There isn't really a reason why you can't go back and play a game 5-10 years from now. It's almost impossible to see a movie in theaters after even the first 2 or 3 weeks of its launch. It usually is out of the theaters. It's difficult to watch a TV show on non-streaming services, at least, after the first couple of weeks of its launch. You can DVR it if you catch it, and sometimes they'll rerun an episode, but after the first 6 weeks, 6 months of a season airing on a TV show, you have to wait until it either goes to a streaming service or gets rerun on extended cable. So it's just not realistic. And in all fairness, both movies and TVs also run their sales numbers based on the first couple of weeks of viewership. So there definitely are ridiculous expectations there. Where, particularly if you think about the Mona Lisa, that's like a 400-year-old painting to guess a number. I would suspect that it's probably somewhere around 300 or 400 years old. People have been enjoying the Mona Lisa. All of society has benefited from the Mona Lisa for a very, very long time there. It would have been ridiculous if the painter of the Mona Lisa said, everybody needs to buy a pre-ordered ticket to see the Mona Lisa when it's on display at the Louvre in the first 6 months. There's just no reason to have these exclusivity periods and these accounting nonsense. And I don't want to get into an economics rant, but it does highlight how economics is corrupting art at a certain level here. Because here you have an artist who is compromising his own desire and ideals, because the true ideal that any artist should have, and probably does have, is to get as many people to see and enjoy his art in Final Fantasy XVI as soon as possible, as much as possible. But he has to compromise those ideals because he has to pay himself to keep himself fed and well kept, and therefore he's now preaching that we won't make a PC version within the 6-month exclusivity period. And I do believe he was the guy that was also pushing people to purchase the game in the 6-month exclusivity period. I'll leave it at that. But yeah. Hitman Studio IO Interactive has announced it's making an online fantasy RPG. It's previously been claimed that the studio was developing a dragon-themed Xbox exclusive, which there was speculation on that it was going to be a rethought around Scalebound, and that they perhaps were going to use some of the assets or some of the stories from Scalebound. It still could very well be the case. If anything, a online fantasy version of Scalebound kind of would make a lot of sense, instead of Scalebound being a single player game. We only saw a little bit of a trailer on Scalebound before it eventually got cancelled. Now, there is some question as far as just what can you really expect. We kind of don't know as far as IO Interactive, as far as making an online fantasy RPG game. Imagine Hitman, but you take out all of the assassination and killing, and instead have role-playing elements and talking to more characters. That probably would work fine. This concept art looks interesting. I do like the IOI logo. That's like 101. It's a nice logo, thought. But yeah, I don't know specifically what a dragon-based RPG game could be. It could be very different from what we're seeing here. You could be playing as dragons the whole time. But yeah, any good writer, of which I imagine there aren't that many good fantasy writers, could probably create a decent dragon fantasy world. Let's see. Moving on, Video Games Chronicle says Cyberpunk 2077 is now Steam Deck verified. The Steam verified tag refers to the games tested by Valve to perform well. It's probably a good thing, but there is also always this danger that a new patch or new version could break things. However, it is almost the snake eating its tail, Ouroboros concept, that if a company cares about being Steam Deck verified, which that's the big if, then being mentioned and getting a press release to say your game is now verified, or even just getting kind of an award on your Steam page that says the deck is verified, that then motivates CD Projekt to make sure any new patches and new versions are tested well on the Steam Deck and maintain that verified state. Nobody wants to lose the verified state. In fact, it will be probably pretty big news once we see a game that all of a sudden loses its verified state. It'll be some game that tries to add some DRM or something almost certainly after the fact, or just changes itself drastically, or becomes very, very buggy in a patch. Still not really sure I would want to play Cyberpunk 2077. At some point I will probably want to play it, but I do think it is probably one of those games I would rush through quite a bit. Apparently the Super Mario Bros. Movie is releasing 2 days earlier than previously announced. It's now going to debut on April 5th in more than 60 markets. And here we can see Mario and Luigi. I still assume that everybody is just in that same holding pattern. You have one side of probably kids that will watch it and enjoy it, and that is almost certainly the target audience. And then you'll have the parents of those kids saying the voice is all off and that the story is too kid friendly, or that the story is just out of character for these characters. But yeah, I definitely am not expecting big things from the Mario movie. And honestly, if it is just a moderate success, it's good enough. A good kids movie could probably run in theaters for 4 to 5 weeks without any competition anyways. So you just leave it at that. Moving on, EA has reportedly laid off over 100 Apex Legends testers out of the blue. Update, it's now claimed that over 200 employees were let go on Tuesday. So, yeah. At any point, we could see even more news of people laying people off. As soon as one company started doing layoffs in the game industry, another one was going to do it, and another one is going to do it, and another one is going to do it. It's not, nobody's going to be safe for probably a while. And yeah, I don't know if there really is any more story to say here. It was a unscheduled mandatory Zoom meeting at 8 a.m. They will receive 60 days severance, which is less than the length of many of their contracts, which that's almost certainly illegal. But yeah, that's the life of being a game tester, and we probably, I mean, you either do one or two things. You have social safety nets like universal basic income, or actual better unemployment options and support, or you force companies like EA to not fire people so out of the blue and so easily. Neither system particularly works perfectly. But it would definitely be nicer, in my opinion, if companies like EA were desperate for game testers, were paying game testers a lot, were having to hire a lot more just because they couldn't overwork them for extremely brief amounts of times, and then lay them off. Inherently, this creates this weird situation where you have to have all of society, as far as game testers, boycott taking jobs that aren't like full-time jobs or long-term contract jobs, and particularly if there's some way in which you can lay off people when you had a contract with them and breach your own contracts. 60 days severance is just not enough, honestly. But yeah, that's bad news. You certainly can't say it any other way. Moving on, Xbox says some GoldenEye type reveals are planned before its summer showcase, but Phil Spencer suggests Microsoft is saving major announcements for a June event. So GoldenEye type reveals probably means these are going to be more remasters or re-releases of older games. It wouldn't be surprising if it was Perfect Dark, the original Perfect Dark, has been remastered. But you're talking old games that maybe you would have said GoldenEye was a AAA game back when it was originally released. Now you at best call it a single A game by modern standards. The quality is just so low. And the amount of content in particular, even if you just ignore the quality, the amount of content in GoldenEye would be too small compared to modern games. Of course, you could also look at GoldenEye type and think that they're perhaps referring to the surprise of a GoldenEye coming to an Xbox platform. But in a lot of ways, this kind of article isn't going to tell you much of anything. Yep. You would think there might be Hi-Fi Rush type announcements, and that would catch more people's attention if you said that. So it's got to be less colorful and less successful than Hi-Fi Rush, and about as colorful and visually appealing or about as successful as GoldenEye, which that's not a very high bar. Moving on, Xbox says it's not interested in playing the exclusivity game with Call of Duty. We've heard this same sentiment multiple times. It's kind of ridiculous to even ask the question. If I was interviewing somebody at Microsoft, I could definitely think of better questions than just getting them to talk about how they're not going to go as far as exclusivity with Call of Duty. I would say it would be much better to just say, ask them about, do you plan on going exclusive with Bethesda games or Double Fine games or any of your other subsidiaries? Like, get them on paper as making a commitment one way or another as far as smaller games, instead of asking about Call of Duty, because you can basically get the same sentiment if all of a sudden they say, we don't have any plans to announce at this time as far as exclusivity as far as Bethesda games, because that would almost be a confirmation that they do plan on making Bethesda games exclusive eventually. But yeah, a Doom Eternal sequel, or just a Wolfenstein game, those going exclusive are almost as impactful as Call of Duty going exclusive. Skyrim, the next Elder Scrolls game, that becoming an exclusive would be much bigger than Call of Duty going exclusive. Yeah. And inherently, none of these interviews matter at all, because they can always change their mind. They can always lie to interviewers. Like, even if you say something to the press and it shows up in a court case, you can say, well, we changed our mind later. So I'll leave it at that. The Coalition is hiring for its next Gears of War game. Apparently, a new job listing says the studios wants to forge the future of the IP, which, okay. Speaking of different hairstyles, here you have a kind of salt and pepper beard that is very gruff and focused on, but very often in these military games they're wearing hats or helmets, and so you don't really see a lot of hair styles anyways. I still kind of question, though, whether, what's his name, Marcus Phoenix is going to be the main character in the next Gears of War game, or if there's even really a lot to do with Gears of War. At a certain level, I think we've probably hit the wall. Like, Halo cannot do anything more to make it a better Halo. Gears of War probably can't do much more to make it a better Gears of War game. Like, you can tell the different stories in the same gameplay mechanics, in the same environments, but the idea of making the easy improvements by having better visual rendering technology or better CPU power, more RAM, bigger maps, we've just kind of hit the maximum on all of that, down to the point where the only thing that has caught anybody's attention in the past 5 years is ray tracing reflections. Just slightly better graphics. Like, I don't want levels in Gears of War or any game to be twice as big as they are now. In most games, at least. I would probably like better sound, but they're never going to bother to focus on sound. I don't want twice as many gameplays. That's one thing about Prey, too, is that the weapon selection wheel on Prey originally starts off where you hold down the Y button and you have a circle that goes around and lets you select potentially, I would say, about 10 different weapons or abilities. After you get that 11th or that one more ability, it turns your weapon selection wheel into a spiral, and you're just spiraling down a staircase to select the weapon, which inherently means when you hold down the Y button and press downward, you have no idea what weapon that will be. It's going to move around and not stay consistently. And that has been a problem growing from a lot of games, is that there are too many weapons, too many options, and no good system for a weapon selection wheel at this point to quick change between weapons. Gears of War could certainly address that fairly easily, because Gears of War tends to stick to the chainsaw gun. But yeah, games are just becoming a little bloated with variety that maybe isn't always that necessary. Of course, that really is nothing to do with the job listing. I do hope they make a new Gears of War game. I hope it's good. I hope it doesn't go crazy with some of the live service nonsense that they tried to put in the last one. And hopefully the story is perhaps a little bit better. The last Gears of War game had this big open area for not really a good reason. So I'd imagine they should get rid of that and just go back to more linear narrative gameplay. Let's see. Moving on, the Team Sonic head, Takashi Lizuka? Oh no, that's a funny last name, Lizuka. Lizuka. I've never seen a name like that in Japanese. Anyways, he is taking the new executive officer role at Sega. He will now be the Sonic Creative Officer at Sega of America, which, okay, maybe means he really won't be in charge of making Sega games. Unless Sega of America is making all the Sonic games. Outwardly looking in, Sega has said they actually liked the amount of success from the most recent Sonic game. So we kind of have to just assume that this is a move to move towards that, where future Sonic games will be most like Sonic Frontiers. This is weird. He just has either his eyeball clipping through here or a white patch, which wouldn't make any sense at all. It'll be a long time, almost certainly, before we see any kind of fallout from this guy being in charge of Sega or Sonic. And then the funny way, being put in charge of just Sonic instead of being promoted specifically to run more of Sega is a little weird too. But Sega in Japan does run a bunch of other types of companies, arcades and things. Moving on. A list of more than 220 classic Pokemon is returning in Scarlet and Violet's DLC. Has seemingly been leaked. The lengthy list of missing companions has been data mined. That is certainly the direction you would assume that Pokemon is going, or should be going, is to bring back a lot of the Pokemon that didn't get 3D models and weren't added to Scarlet and Violet. The Pokemon Company does have this unenviable task in which they need to make modern 3D models, which they're not really doing, of what I imagine is close to 800 Pokemon eventually, because everybody is going to have, every Pokemon is going to have at least a small percentage of fans, and there isn't a good argument not to make 3D models of all of the characters. If anything, Scarlet and Violet probably was too ambitious, and Hey You Pikachu's level of animation should have been what Scarlet and Violet also did, what Shield and Sword before Scarlet and Violet did, what the Arceus game should have done before that. They ran before they learned to walk effectively. But also the fact that I can name 3 3D Pokemon games that have been released in a relatively short amount of time, and they still have major bugs and major problems and haven't 3D modeled all the Pokemon already, highlights how they're just not putting enough effort and enough resources into the giant franchise that is Pokemon. Of course, it is also worth pointing out that this list very possibly is just full of lies, and it is just a fandom thing. Video Games Chronicle here does not have the actual list showing, which, yeah, none of the news sources I follow bother to actually report on leaks in the sense that they actually repeat the leaks. They only either link to the leaks or mention the leaks and don't ever report on it. Moving on, Gran Turismo and Just Dance will be events at the 2023 Olympic Esports Series. Qualifications for all 9 games begins today, with live finals in June. So apparently there's some kind of Olympic esports thing. These aren't particularly new games. So there's an archery game called Tic-Tac-Bow, never heard of it. There's a baseball game. There's a chess.com game. There's a cycling game called Zwift. There's Just Dance for dance. Motorsport is Gran Turismo 7. I can see why the Olympics would want to do motorsports in a virtual reality, particularly since that's not something that they've had before, and the Olympics have been certainly arguing that chess should be in the Olympics. Some of these other physical things definitely could just be in physical ways. represented already, and so there's going to be some redundancy and some weirdness around that. The vast majority of these games, though, do not feel like games you would have ever heard of. And almost certainly the next Olympics will not mention this esports Olympics series at all. And they'll try to keep them their own separate things. It is a little surprising, though, that they don't just have some kind of NASCAR-like racings for the Olympics. But the general idea, I guess, is that most Olympic events are about humans showing off their human ability, whereas a racing is only showing off a reaction while controlling a super souped up car. It's a little bit too much of a tool that you're interacting with compared to most other Olympic events. I can't imagine, though, too many kids who want to be esports heroes or esports competitors would be particularly interested in watching an Olympic event versus going to an esports event and watching it live in an arena. Moving on, apparently they have a Video Games Chronicle as a first play. Watch us explore platforming history in Wonder Boy Anniversary Collection. That's not really news, and we may start to see Video Games Chronicle try to promote themselves more and more. They said they were promoting themselves having a new podcast before, a couple days ago. And then our last Video Games Chronicle article for today says Xbox Game Studio team visits Kojima Productions, quote, to kick off an exciting journey. Hideo Kojima Studio is working with Microsoft on a cloud-based game. So, yeah. Here you've got Hideo Kojima shaking hands and smiling smugly. And then you've got what I can only assume is an Xbox engineer character shaking his hand to get a picture. Because I do not recognize this guy. And certainly you can see slender, probably skinny, even for a Japanese guy, or right about average, to not that, just to be kind, as far as a Western person. And yeah, Japanese people, not particularly fans of fat people, are very tolerant of differences of any kind. I assume here, though, in this article, as I'm trying to skim it, that there is actually no real news as far as what this cloud-based game is, and I assume what it is going to be is just something that is really, really crazy, but might be a little bit more logical as far as what Death Stranding was trying to be. If that is the type of games Kojima wants to make, is that people have to play together and interact with each other to make a living world change, then cloud gaming makes a lot of sense. This would be the third time, I imagine, that I know of where Kojima games have really focused around gamers interacting with each other in one way or another. He's doing very experimental things that probably should be done on a much smaller budget. And mostly, though, I'm not super impressed with Kojima's efforts, because he also is bringing in a lot of Hollywood people, and definitely feels like he is more interested with rubbing elbows with famous Hollywood people than he is making a game that would satisfy most players. I really would be interested in seeing what the satisfaction rating is on Death Stranding as far as game players, or what the completion rating is. Let's test that. Just Death Stranding. We'll Google search that. Oh. Doing that on Steam. That is where we want to go with that. Okay, so Death Stranding Director's Cut in the last 30 days is 91% positive of 668 reviewers. It's 93% positive of 11,000. So there obviously is more to the game than what I thought, or more fans of the game than what I thought. Because honestly, the idea of just being a courier and having to walk across America does not feel like a great experience. Although you can see now they've just created these entire roads. But yeah, you cannot deny mob rule here. There is a massive amount of positivity, a huge spike of positivity here. I don't know why. Perhaps this is when a update and the new features were added. Major positivity first few weeks, and really no negativity at all, which is applaudable. We could use SteamDB to say that its all-time peak, 6,093 people playing, and its peak today was so far 1,121 players. So yeah, I'm actually a little bit shocked by that. Like, I honestly would have suspected more people would have fallen off, that most people wouldn't have made it to the ending, or most people would have gotten bored with it. But I guess the story is king, and Kojima is just a good storyteller, or he's a like storyteller at least. Alright, moving on to the Gematsu articles. Wulong Fallen Dynasty has a launch trailer and final demo now available if you want to check that out. It's probably a little bit unfair, but Wulong is definitely just not catching my attention. And it almost certainly is because it's just the Monkey King type Chinese, feudal Chinese, ancient Chinese visuals. I really should give it more of a shot. Like, actually looking at this trailer, there's absolutely nothing wrong with this. This looks perfectly fine, and it gives you that visual variety of more action than you would of different types of visuals and different types of action. It's being produced by Team Ninja. That's a big name. And yet, for some reason, I'm just not as hyped to it. And probably that's because there's been a lot of really bad Chinese games that have tried to show those same kind of visuals and tell that same kind of story. Moving on, Line Monster Rancher launches February 28th in Japan. Which, yeah, very possibly that won't come to the West. Magical Drop 6 launches April 25th for Switch and PC, and then later for PS4 and Xbox One. This is just a matching game. Grey Hill Incident launches June 9th. I feel like some of these articles we already talked about on Monday. Interesting. It'd be weird if we got duplicate articles from Gematsu, because that tend to only get duplicate articles from Video Games Chronicle. The asymmetric multiplayer horror sequel Deceit 2 has been announced for basically everything, due out at sometime in 2023. Nintendo is going to skip E3 2023. In particular, I probably haven't emphasized enough that Nintendo is mostly going to skip this because they don't really have anything new to announce. Baldur's Gate 3. The Xbox Series version is in the works but being held back by technical issues. I already talked about that before. Grand Blue Fantasy adds this. Yes, this is definitely some repetitive articles here. Grand Blue Fantasy has a new character, going for cheesecake with this new character for sure, showing off line cleavage. Japanese games coming out. Yeah, we covered that too. Master Detective Archives, Rain Code, we talked about that. These are all repetitive articles. So let's just close them quickly and see what the new news is. There really shouldn't even be that much new news. Because, let's see, it's Omen of Sorrow. Hasn't come out yet. Really shouldn't be that much new news between Monday and Wednesday anyways. There tends to be a decent amount of new games released between the two times, and there tends to be a little bit of news. And all my plugins are not letting this video play, or any of these videos. Omen of Sorrow does intrigue me as potentially a Killer Instinct competitor. This is probably new. A narrative RPG called the Thaumaturge, formerly Project Vitriol, has been revealed for PC. It's from publisher 11-Bit Studios and developer Fool's Theory. I don't know if I recognize any one of those names. And Thaumaturge, well, that's a unique word. I'm not sure if it means anything at all. What kind of game is it? Kind of looks almost like a Diablo game, but really hard to tell. Also kind of looks like it could be a point and click adventure. They're calling it a RPG game. Let's watch this trailer. Let's go ahead and skip some, save ourselves some time. So this is the announced trailer. So this is almost certainly just starting credits with a flyby sequence. Maybe you turn into this big monster. Well, I skipped around there, but really aren't showing much of anything. You fly around sequence, then it flips to night, then you see this guy and he's waving his hand over some kind of magical sigil or book and potentially summoning a monster, I guess. Yeah, that is not really a lot to go on. Let's see. Paradox Interactive announcement show set for March 6th. New game announcements, updates, and more. Presented by Xbox. Let's see. Teaser trailer might give us a bit of a hint as to what to expect. Well, I see several different types of games. Although most of these games are not particularly that major games as far as the looks of them, so if they are just going to give updates around their existing Paradox Interactive lineup, that very possibly isn't going to be that impressive. A game called Strayed Lights launches April 25th, and they have a 4-minute gameplay trailer released. Seems like it's coming out for basically everything. It's a action adventure game. Which, alright. I think I'm hitting at a point where a glowing character is not interesting to me anymore. There have been some games in previous years where that kind of artistic thing where it was a character made out of flame or light might have caught my attention, but now I want to see just more detail in the character design than, oh, he's made purely out of energy. And in all fairness, the depiction of that character was a little bit different. You can see one foot is different than the other, and he had some kind of pattern on his chest. Although if you're looking at the character from behind, you may not see too much of a difference there. You can almost immediately guess that the character is going to change his color for different reasons and different abilities. Looks like there might be some time manipulation mechanic too. Yep, and it seems like you have to match the colors for elemental attacks. In a lot of ways, this is like Fury in Darksiders 3, where she's changing her hairstyle to do different kinds of abilities. Which, yeah, Darksiders 3 came off particularly pathetic for that idea, and that she's just swapping her hair for different types of ability, hair color. And that's arguably the most impressive thing about her as a character, is that she can change her hair. That in Wrath, I think is who she is angry. I mean, I'm already pot committed at a certain level to play a Darksiders 4 if they made one, but I definitely am not hyped or interested more than I was before I played Darksiders 3 to another Darksiders game. I just kind of wanted them to wrap up the story and be done with it, and hopefully do a decent job with it. Another element that was kind of annoying about Darksiders 3 is the idea that they wanted you to play it multiple times over and over again. Well, this gameplay trailer seems to be just switching between red and blue. I'm not really seeing too much of a difference otherwise. Yeah. I kind of would hope that there would have been more elements here, that there would have been some platforming, some more item collecting, some puzzle solving, something more than just seeing the character switch between red and blue. Another Master Detective Archives Raincode character trailer. Seems like this might be the latest game in which they're going to just release a new bit of information, a new press release every couple days until it gets released, and possibly after it gets released. The Tokyo-based studio Flare is established with BlazBlue series Toshimichi Mori as development producer. Mori is also the executive vice president, and then Toshinori, not Toshimichi, Aoki is president and CEO. These people would have been from Marvelous, which I think Marvelous probably still exists, but who knows. It's getting funding from NetEase Games. Does this mean much of anything? Well, Studio Flare feels a lot like Street Fighter as a logo, so that's probably what they're thinking, is to be a competitor to Street Fighter or somehow become the people in charge of making Street Fighter, which wouldn't make a lot of sense. And I assume that they're just going to make more fighting games. The Tokyo Game Show 2023 online outline has been announced. Games in motion, Dueled in Revolution. There's going to be a physical venue, a virtual venue, and an online, which I don't know what the difference really there. I guess maybe the virtual venue is you can see the physical venue in VR. Let's see. It's going to be the largest exhibition ever, they say. The thing here, though, is they're really giving a general outline of everything. That they're not going to list actual games or names or even really mention which companies are going to be there. It's going to happen September 21st through 24th in Chiba, Japan. Noticeably, I would say the Tokyo Game Show is in a very good position to establish itself as the one that is still around compared to E3. And they could certainly have a little bit more Japanese-centric games announced, but just overall try to be a central location in which games get announced in general. That being said, if Tokyo Game Show was going to try to be the new E3, I don't think Japan particularly is still at a point where it would be easy to have foreigners, Westerners in particular, come to Japan and like go to the Tokyo Game Show and like cover that as video game journalists coming to Japan to cover it, or even like game developers from Western companies coming to Japan to pitch their games or look at new games. I wouldn't be surprised if this Tokyo Game Show tries to be a little bit bigger, but still stays very much in the vein of previous Tokyo Game Shows, which tends to have only a few new Japanese games announced, usually just like visual novel type games, and then a lot of games that have already been announced from Japanese companies get shown off, but there's no like exclusives or announcements. There's no award show that centers around the Tokyo Game Show to my knowledge. So it's not like you could bring in Jeff Keighley to do the Game Awards, which that would be their smartest move ever, is to bring in Jeff Keighley of the Game Awards and say, we want you to do Game Awards Japan, and we want you to give awards to Japanese companies and Japanese game developers, and just be the figurehead, and it will just be in Japanese and focus around a Japanese language presentation that's dubbed. Inherently, though, the problem with that is if you were to try to give awards to a bunch of Japanese employees, there would be a lot of pushback from companies like Konami and Square Enix and even Sega and Nintendo that would prevent, where those companies would prevent their employees from showing up to receive the awards. So you'd have to work around that some way. But yeah, if the Tokyo Game Show did have an award ceremony and then it got dubbed later into English or simulcast in English and Japanese, and then that could bring up the profile of the Tokyo Game Show also. Inherently, though, you run into the problem of, at the Tokyo Game Show, there's going to be some visual novel games, there's going to be some adult games, there's going to be anime hentai games there, and if you have a bunch of Western game developers that hate Japanese games in general, or hate anime as an art style, or hate adult games, or hate hentai, whatever, if they just hate that enough that they're not comfortable there, then you've already created a problem there where they're not going to want to come back. So it draws this line in the sand where the Tokyo Game Show would either have to drastically change the entire Japanese culture and the entire landscape of Japanese games to accommodate foreigners, or they would do the right thing, in my opinion, and not accommodate foreigners. And right now, that's what we've got with the Tokyo Game Show, is that it is for Japanese people, by Japanese people, as a presentation. Moving on. We already talked about Loomis Productions to merge with Square Enix on May 1st. I don't think there's probably anything new to say to that. We already talked about Elden Ring expansion being announced. Let's see. Komatsu has a Final Fantasy XVI detailed breakdown with producer Naoki Yoshida, which this looks like this is more of possibly that same interview where he eventually says he would like to bring the game to PC. Arguably, you get a very different type of headline here if this is that same article, because it isn't focused on just bringing it to PC as the headline. And Komatsu generally has just done a better job of taking an interview and presenting more of that interview, because this is a long scrolling interview post or a long scrolling article. Komatsu generally does not have interviews either. And then Final Fantasy 16 gameplay, dungeon mid-boss, Akon battle, timely accessories, over 45 minutes of free. Interesting. You know what may have happened here is that I'm seeing this Komatsu headlines changing, like they're doing a different art style. So maybe that's why we got the redundant articles, is because they've changed how the page looks. Let's just give this, turn off the visual filters, see what it looks like. Yeah, that looks different, at least on the headline titles. A lot of this looks the same. They might be piece by piece changing things. But yeah, if they've changed the headlines, they may have changed how their articles are listed. Yep. Or it could just be that they went really crazy, in particular with Final Fantasy stuff. We have 3 Final Fantasy articles here in a row, making a really big deal around Final Fantasy 16, which arguably is a pretty big deal. But then the Games with Gold article is just kind of back to what we would expect otherwise, where you'd have text at the top and then a sub headline and then a regular page. We already talked about the Games with Gold, so we don't have to cover that again. The first-person horror action game Beneath has been announced for the PS5, Xbox Series, and PC. I suppose it's worth mentioning that I saw a slickdeals.net for Verizon customers, where you potentially could get an Xbox Series S for like $150 to $125, almost half off. At this point, I question whether you really should get an Xbox Series S unless you just are going to hack it, or it is your secondary console and you don't want to buy 2 Series X's, which is understandable. But it does definitely feel like the Series S is going to be pressured eventually to lose its support prematurely. This animation does not look particularly good. And that the Xbox Series X will be the only console, or there will be a Series X that is a discless version, which would even confuse it even more. But yeah, it's I shouldn't mention the sale. It might be a weird point that we're in. Well, this looks like it might be a decent game, but the graphics do look a little rough. This Christmas, as far as hardware goes, if there's no new Nintendo announced, like, I'm not sure that there would be a great argument to buy any hardware, because I doubt there's a new Xbox or PlayStation that's going to be announced. And I don't really expect any major improvements on PC side, so it might be a decent time just to get cheaper PC components, although I'm not even sure PC components get that cheap around Christmas. But yeah, very much may just be a holding pattern this year. Steam Deck has already said they're not really planning on releasing a new version anytime soon. Yeah. Moving on. I need to hurry up. A game called Infernax Deus or Die updates launches this spring, adds multiplayer mode and new character. I don't recognize a game called Infernax, though. Well, it definitely looks like it is a like old school kind of Castlevania game. Yep. I think I do own the Castlevania Anniversary Collection. This is like the Contra characters. Which that would drastically change how the game played, certainly if you can just run around shooting things. But yeah, if I ever do try to actually cover the Castlevania Anniversary Collection, it's going to be really hard to actually try and play the old Castlevania games. Moving on, Tekken 8 has Jin Kazama gameplay trailer, which I don't know any of the Tekken characters, so I don't know if it's really necessary to try and watch a guy I'm unfamiliar with do moves. Yeah, Tekken doing a much visually polished version of Tekken compared to Tekken 1, in that it is a 3D sidestep fighting game. But that's about all I know. And this looks fine. Like, I'm definitely not an expert in fighting games either. So I'll leave it at that. A game called Loop 8 Summer of Gods has an opening movie, and here we have a screenshot of a lady with her cleavage shown. These little, like, half yin, half yang symbols, I've seen them in multiple anime series. I've never really gotten an idea as far as what they're actually supposed to symbolize, or if they have a consistent meaning. Like, sometimes I think it means spirits or ghosts, but who knows. As far as the opening movie, let me blur and play this because it might get content ID'd otherwise. Let's see. The thumbnail showed a group of anime characters. And yeah. If anything, it seems like it's hand-drawn backgrounds and CGI foregrounds. And we've got a collection of different kind of CGI anime characters. And they're in some kind of, I guess, time loop is the idea. That would make sense. Some of the animation definitely feels rough. So it may be one specific anime guy is in a time loop meeting up with 8 other characters, and then that leads to something, but now they're all showing off these like magical abilities. So this might very well be like a Persona game as far as the actual gameplay. Yeah. I can't help but overemphasize though how unimpressive. Where's my mouse cursor? Where are you? Mouse cursor. There you go. Just how unimpressive these characters look in their CGI kind of rendering of it. Visually, you have some characters that stand out somewhat. Cat Girl, a younger character, not in a school outfit. But then you have some other characters that are very dull looking characters. Yeah, it doesn't quite seem like it's got the most polish on it that I would like to see. Moving on, IO Interactive developing an online fantasy RPG. Dueled and game built from the core to entertain players and expand for many years to come. That's a nice promise certainly to make compared to other things. So yeah, we were talking about earlier as far as one of the game artists saying it's time for game developers to handle black hair. Well, here's an example, someone at IO Interactive who's doesn't have black hair. Here's an example of someone else at IO Interactive that doesn't have black hair, in the sense of African descent hair. Here's another person that doesn't have black hair, another person that doesn't have black hair. Now, here you have an Asian with long, flowing black hair, but not of African descent black hair. Another person, another person. Yep. Game development so white and yellow, as it were, as far as the old Oscars so white comparison. Is just not. It would be so much better as far as representation to see someone else, some more diversity here. Yep. Of course, you didn't get into the problem, certainly, as far as diversity goes, in which a lot of times in software and IT type jobs, Google's a great example, where Asians are overrepresented, and so it really can't just be a case in which all minorities, based on census, should get an extra assistance in being hired. As far as affirmative action, it really needs to be more of a balancing force where you have to try to get the percentages somewhat close to what the reality is of a society. Moving on. A game called Postvid launches March 16th for PS4 and Switch later for the PS5. Postvid almost seems like it's a parody of COVID or some kind of what COVID thing, but actually I misread it, didn't I? It's post void. So I made that comparison, not the game, by just misreading it. As far as what post void looks like, though, it's just a guy in some surreal imagery. The actual game seems to be just a like Doom clone type, Wolfenstein clone type game. But in all fairness, I would say a Wolfenstein clone that's moving very fast and built on modern engines. Could be an interesting modernization on the idea. It's probably not that interesting though, because we already really have that with Doom and the Doom reboot and Doom Eternal. The only thing I would say is that the Doom reboot and Doom Eternal didn't throw a ton of levels at you and instead went for more of a natural design of level environments and bigger arena type areas instead of narrow hallways that are always at right angles. But overall, I would say the Doom reboot makes a much better experience than just playing Doom faster and more furiously. Like, you could certainly turn up Doom to nightmare mode even today and have a pretty fast and furious experience. Moving on, Mugen Souls for the Switch launches April 29th. What is Mugen Souls? A turn-based RPG. Rated M for mature. Let me filter this out and blur it just for two reasons there. M for mature and because it's a Nintendo thing. So you got these little chibi anime characters. I feel like Mugen is a word I've seen before and heard before. And this doesn't feel like this is a Dark Souls parody. So you got these little chibi anime characters going to different worlds, they're running around. If your trailer has characters running around, then you probably don't have a lot to show. Yeah, it doesn't really feel like it has a lot to show here. Well, good thing that's blurred. I mean, that is all steamy. So there's this whole Hot Springs minigame element too. Well, alright. I will have to assume Mugen Souls is an adult game or a mediocre game selling itself on part with a Hot Spring lewd pictures, technically nude but with Steam censoring it. It's for the Switch in particular. Kind of a prime example of the type of game that very possibly will be showed at the Tokyo Game Show, and the likes of Microsoft may not really want to show up to the Tokyo Game Show and have their games in a booth right next to Mugen Souls, showing off its Hot Spring mode, which very possibly will get censored if it comes to the West at all. Moving on, a game called Tainted Grail, The Fall of Avalon, launches in early access on March 30th. What kind of game is this? An action RPG? Open world RPG. Kind of has a Diablo type feel or a Skyrim type feel. Yeah, it is a little surprising that there aren't more games that feel like Skyrim. More fantasy games in general. Like, there's been plenty of time for people to steal from Skyrim and try and compete. Maybe there are some elements of Skyrim that actually aren't that good. But, yeah. It is weird that as far as open world fantasy games, my mind goes from Skyrim to Witcher 3. And there's gotta be something in between that. Almost certainly there's World of Warcraft games in between that. There are versions of World of Warcraft as an online game in between that, but really feels like there should be a lot more. Trinity Trigger adds a PC version and launches April 25th in North America and May 16th in Europe. It launched in September of 2022 in Japan. I think we talked about this. What's funny about this is some of these stories I know we talked about and some of them we didn't, so I don't know how the order is so out of order. Genshin Impact version 3.5 update is now available. Every time I see Genshin Impact, it seems like they have a new character as their main protagonist. It feels like there should be at least one or two iconic characters around Genshin Impact that show up in every screenshot. Because, yeah, this cat girl in armor seems completely new. This is interesting. They have a Chinese version, a Korean version, a Japanese version, and an English version. I'm still not sure if Genshin Impact has that much game around it. It would be interesting, certainly, to see if Genshin Impact could make a console version of Genshin Impact with just the main stories, got rid of all the microtransactions and the mobile aspects, and sold itself like a traditional video game. I wonder if that could really happen, or if there just is not enough main story or enough gameplay mechanics for that to make sense. A game called Cry Machina, or Cry Machina, perhaps, launches July 6th in Japan for PS5 and PS4 and Switch, and then in this fall worldwide alongside a PC version. Which, what kind of game is that? Is this part of the Crystar series? Probably not. There's a couple games with Cry in the name. I think this is all new. Just a different series though. Anime girls with mech armor or battle armor. What is it? A JRPG, action RPG game? So she's in the hospital bed and then goes into some kind of virtual reality computer or dream or whatever. There might be a lot of Nier Automata influence around the game like this. It does feel like it might be around that. The problem with a lot of this, though, is that visually a lot of these games look great, but then the actual gameplay is just so incredibly grindy, and the story is either too cheesy or just generic overall. And there's what looks like a really interesting game by its trailer turns out to be not that interesting to play, or it just has too small of a niche audience to be really relevant. This definitely is a game that is focused around crying. Which, yeah, I don't personally get the fetish of wanting to see characters, anime girls cry, but yeah, I could see sadist out there or somebody with a tears fetish perhaps existing and liking that. Moving on, the Dueled Chronicle has a free update that launches March 6th. New scenario, difficulty, weapon types, and more. The Dueled Chronicle is on Steam, so let's see what its response is so far. 45% of 540 user reviews, and it looks like it's an XCOM game, basically a strategy placement game. Well, at the moment, I think we take this off the follow list. The people have spoken. If somehow this free update comes out on March 6th and I see it and people like it, I might consider putting it back on the fall list. That being said, if you are mixed reviewed outside of your launch window, you've already lost a chance to have a big enough audience to be successful. So I assume that Battlefield Chronicle is just another failure of Square Enix's, and will stay that way. RPG Maker Unite launches April 6th. RPG creation tool dated for the Unity Asset Store. A significant portion of people who were making games a long time ago in Unity were using RPG Maker, the original RPG Maker. Unite perhaps has a slightly more improved visuals, and probably a lot of new features that would be nice if you were really trying to make a game. But inherently, the first sales pitch is create RPGs without coding. Through combining preset commands and variables, users can create all the types of events commonly found in RPGs without writing a single line of code. If you cannot write a single line of code, or are not willing to write a single line of code, you should not be making video games. You're just not ambitious enough to make video games. And almost every single RPG Maker game to a T has that problem, where it's not visually polished, it's not telling any interesting story, it doesn't have any appeal at all to it, and it's just being shoveled out onto the Steam store. Now the good news is I think fewer and fewer people are bothering to pay the $100 to Steam Direct to release RPG Maker games, or perhaps even Valve is saying no to more RPG Maker games, because we're seeing less and less of them being released. Unfortunately, RPG Maker Unite, the newest version, may cause that number to shoot straight up again. The Famitsu review scores for issue 1787 says Hogwarts Legacy got 37 out of 40. That's pretty good. Ib got 30 out of 40. And Oni Road to the Mightiest Oni got 30 out of 40. So yeah, 3 9s and a 10 from Famitsu. Remembering Famitsu is probably only given a 40 out of 40 to probably about 8 games in its entire history of reviewing video games. A Japanese studio, Siege Games, announces a multiplayer mech action shooter called Project MBR for PS5 and PC. It's due out April 2024. A Kickstarter campaign is launching on March 7th. Do we have anything here? See some weapons of war, I guess. Tanks and vehicles and things like that. Not particularly impressive to me, but then again, I also am not a fan of the idea of Transformers type tanks, which is basically what I would classify this as Transformer type tanks. Seems like there might be some ambition here to be able to add and remove components, almost like BattleBots, which is an old anime cartoon. Yep. This is definitely feels like this is a creation from somebody who is pretty old in Japanese, who would have done a bunch of model kits in his youth and is now trying to make a game based around that. You can see that he has over 30 years of experience, so I just don't know if there's that big of an audience for tanks and robots and mechs. Let's see, the game Atlas Fallen launches May 16th. Explore ancient ruins and unearth the mysteries of the sand-covered Atlas. Now, I probably would look a little bit smarter if I didn't run the mouse right under the words as I was reading, but I would probably sound a little stupider as I say the wrong words like I just did. It's not really a lot of screenshots of this game. It might be something and it might not, which is something you could say about almost every game. And then our last Gamatsu article, Atari Mania is coming to the PS5, PS4 on April 4th. It's currently already available for the Switch and PC. What kind of game is it? Let's check it out on Steam. Well, it's mixed reviewed. It is published by Atari. Seems like it's the idea of a collection of old Atari games, which it feels like you would have to have a lot of reverence for those old games. Otherwise, it seems like it's a almost point-and-click adventure game with some mini-game elements. I'm going to put this on the follow list, even though it really doesn't have a justification to be on the follow list. Yep. I'm not sure I understood what the game really was when I first looked at it. That being said, that may be a common problem, is that people don't understand what it is and then immediately think it's something else. And remember, it's important to remember also that Atari, the Atari that exists now, is not the old Atari by any means. I think Atari has gone out of business and been acquired. The name has been acquired by at least 2 or 3 different companies. Here we have a visual novel that's already mixed. Interesting. This is February 28th. Yeah. It's funny it has that many reviews as a game. Let's see. And then here you have a more dark-skinned girl, still with blonde hair, or brunette brown hair. Here you have a dark-skinned guy, with the hair not being depicted particularly well. Although in all fairness, it kind of doesn't matter. Like in this artistic style, you really aren't going to put a lot of detail in the hair either. Here you have a dark elf with long flowing black hair. Yep. So even in smaller romance visual novels, we haven't really seen the African descent hair concept. We'll keep an eye out as we look at all the games that came out on Steam. Of course, most of these games are just going to be garbage anyways. Yep. And is it really fair to complain about the hairstyle in a game when there's been just no quality at all in the animation at all? Alright, so here we have a game called Hackers Restart, which is 3D CGI characters. Noticeably, you do have some black hair, I would say, here. This may be a flock of seagulls type haircut, or a big swoosh of hair. It's a weird art style. It's funny that we're looking at an adult visual novel, and that's the first one. Here you have a fairly light-skinned lady, but very wavy, sandy bleached hair. In this, I wish I could show this more, but it being an adult game, that's a no-go. Here you have a very dark-skinned police officer lady, and while you can't see a lot of her hair behind her hat, I see a little bit that seems realistic. It's funny you'd have a police officer in a shootout sequence. You know what's funny about this too is that here you have another dark-skinned lady, even though she has wavy bleached hair. You tend in adult content to not have them cross gender barriers so much. So like this is an Asian lady too. with purple hair. Particularly when you're talking like live action pornos, you'll have you'll have black guys on white women sometimes, but that's almost the fetish that it gets sold on, that the video is promoting. So Hackers Restart is the name of this game, and it is by far the most diverse game we've seen so far. Particularly because visually diverse is what you're looking for. There's another picture of black hair. Hackers Restart is $4.24. It's English only. Now you do run into problems, certainly, in that it's still an adult game and it's still just a visual novel. I'm going to keep an eye out for that going forward, though. Package of Steel doesn't look interesting. It's just to see how diverse the adult games tend to be on Steam, because they actually, I haven't been looking at it and paying attention to it, but they very possibly are a lot more diverse. At least the 3D CGI ones made by probably Western developers. This is, I assume, an old Japanese game visual novel. Doesn't support English. It's $13.49. And yeah, I have no idea what even the name of it is. Definitely looks like an old animation, but maybe it's just being drawn that way. VR Construction Lab. Education beyond the classroom and the field, it says. It's a free-to-play VR game. Every now and then we see one of these VR apps that almost certainly was sold at some point at a very high markup to educators, vocational educators, or they tried to sell it out to vocational schools, but I wouldn't be surprised if very few people actually bought them or bought VR headsets to match with that. I could see college level people, though, at some kind of vocational college using VR to learn some things, but honestly, it's probably better to have the muscle memory and do it in the real world in a lab environment than do it in a virtual lab environment. Bless Global is mixed reviewed. Otherwise, I might have given it a follow. Ruined Kingdom. Probably no. Probably should speed up a little bit too. Animalistic. Well, this looks funny enough for a YouTube short at least. Have a Bloody Goal. Looks funny enough for a YouTube short at least. Eden Create World. Doesn't look like anything. The Nameless Braves Heaven Episode 1. So he has 8 more flatter visual novel that doesn't look particularly interesting. Deep Inside. I'm gonna give this a follow just to be generous, but not make a short around it. It's not visually good enough. Which probably is an argument that it shouldn't be on the follow list either. Card Crawl Adventure. This has a lot of visual polish on its user interface, but I'm not sure there's quite enough of a gameplay mechanic, in the sense it seems like most of the game is just taking place here, and there's wasted space here and wasted space here and maybe wasted space there, but I'll give it a chance. A simple request. I've seen some horror games that kind of have this art style and this blur to it, and I could see it almost being intentional to disturb your expectations, but yeah, I don't think I would say yes to this, because it still just looks ugly, and I don't want to play ugly games when I know you can just make a horror game that looks better if you put more effort into it or put more skill on it. Small town detective. Again, I'm going to give this a follow, but no short. Is this an adult game you see love? Doesn't have any mature content. It feels like it would have been an adult game. A humorous and wholesome anime-style dating simulator based on personified University of California schools plus more. Which I guess that means you have to be incredibly familiar with University of California schools. Feels like that is too niche and too specific to really be a product sold to the masses, more than to be a student project or a joke you would pass around amongst your friends. And in general, if you're playing a romance game, wholesome romance, it's not a genre that I don't think too many people really want, and it's not a genre that's been built up, so it really doesn't have a lot of foundations. Well, Furry Futa is the next adult game here, which is just anthropomorphic animals, with them being futanaris and having dick girls. Although, frankly, a lot of times they're showing the butts anyway, so it seems like that's inconsistent with what you're selling, and it doesn't look particularly quality. It's being sold as early access for no reason. It says it has full audio support for 103 languages. It's being sold for 254 cents. I'm still nowhere close to thinking that these types of games are actually trying to titillate a particular market versus just trying to sell as joke games or just trying to flood Steam. And the problem here with them being furries is, well, there's a dark-skinned like bull girl. Trying to claim any real diversity for different color skin tones when they're all animals doesn't really make a lot of sense. So, yeah. Really can't claim diversity when there's no humans being included at all in an adult game. It really has become this weird three-way balancing of trying to get a feel of whether there's an equal amount of Western, more CGI type adult games, Eastern, more anime type flat 2D adult games, and then furry games, which are almost certainly Western games, but appealing to a very specific fetish. This guy's hair, even though this game is not particularly that interesting looking, and I'm just going to dismiss it. A lot of braids there. So, yeah. It's very possible that the argument that there aren't enough black hairstyles only really applies to major AAA game developers and possibly Japanese game developers. This is a Sokoban game. It doesn't really seem like it's applying to smaller indie developers who are willing to experiment and do things differently. inherently, I'm not sure if the gaming industry is best served in its current state, as most gamers are only aware of and only playing major AAA games from major AAA publishers, and other developers are just being completely ignored. I'm going to give this a chance. This doesn't look like anything. Really? Joke game, troll game. Surprising my neighbors too. Doesn't look like anything. Most of these games don't look like anything. A lot of these games don't even have like humans in them in the screenshots. It's either horror monsters and you're in first person perspective, or you're just not in anything. Well, here's an interesting looking game. Nyla's Castle. Nayla. Another adult game. Looks to me like it is a 3D platforming game of some form. Yeah, they say it's a platforming action game, contains monster girls, lesbians, femdoms, futanari animations, and artwork. Regain freedom by escaping Nyla's castle. So it's an escape game. I've seen some of these kinds of ideas where you're just trying to run away and escape while being naked. And if you get caught, then you get rewarded for being caught by seeing a adult animation. It's English only, and they're promoting another game called The Dream Cutter as coming soon. Yeah. There's another one of these types of games that's in development that I've seen a lot of in development artwork, where a somewhat naked lady is tied up in bandages and trying to run away from mummies. The animation, I would say, on this, while being flat 2D, does not inherently look very anime, kawaii, or moe in its style. It looks like it's more of a Western thing, which would be in line with it only supporting English. As far as diversity goes, well, I see some white characters and a red demon lady as the main focus. There is a black gray skinned character in one screenshot. The hairstyles are all drawn in a flat, simplistic style for the most part, so I wouldn't really claim there's a lot of diversity in this one as far as that. Which this is probably the only stream I'm going to bother to talk about that, because that's going to get very annoying, come to think of it now, if I'm just I'll mention it in the adult ones and just try to be more aware of that, where in the past I've probably been a little bit colorblind to it, unaware of it, naive of it. What's funny about this Nyla's Castle, though, is I'm going to put it on the fall list, which again just bloats the fall list more with adult games. But it's trying, because the game is trying to do something to be more of a game. I would prefer to play a platformer than a slide puzzle game if I'm playing an adult game. But they probably need to think of a different way of doing things too. You probably should be playing as the bad guys, capturing a infinite amount of escaping maidens, and then when you capture them, you get the cutscene after capturing a certain amount of them, instead of being the escaping maiden fleeing the bad guys. You shouldn't be rewarded for being caught unless the goal is to be caught, which it isn't. Alright, Puppet Master the game. This is interesting. That being said, I think this might be a bit of a scam. Or maybe not. What I was thinking of, and I think I'm wrong here, so I'm going to take that back, is there was a point where somebody was taking public domain movies, particularly the first one with zombies in it, Night of the Living Dead, and then they were making a low effort video game around that public domain movie and selling it. That is absolutely not what this is. This looks like somebody actually is 3D rendering and trying to make a Puppet Master game. Now, the Puppet Master series has some weirdness around it quite a bit, in that it was fairly low budget, so it's questionable whether there would be a lot of budget towards a video game version of it. And at one point, I think the narrative was Nazism was bad around the third movie, because it was like some Nazi guy had trapped the souls of people, either his friends or his enemies, in the puppets. But at some point, they rapidly made so many Puppet Master movies that there was one where it was straight up just Nazism is good or Nazi is good, or it felt kind of like that. Maybe the creator went off the deep end. I'd have to really do more research to be certain about that, and frankly I should just ignore that anyways. Can you have a good game around the Puppet Master movie series? Probably. I assume that this is an online player versus player thing where you're playing as tiny puppets, either working together to kill a human, or having one person play as the human and multiple people playing as the puppets. 3 versus 1 Thief game mode trailer. I'm going to put this on the follow list because it's an intriguing idea. What else has October Games made? Though they made a game called Horror Legends, and let's see what that is. Collection of kind of generic horror creatures in, I assume, player versus asymmetrical player versus player type game. So same concept. Somehow they have gotten the Puppet Master license. You can even see some cursed dolls. Probably isn't too hard to get the Puppet Master license either. We definitely are going to run out of those kinds of horror movies, though. If you tried to make video games on it, we'd have to rapidly develop new games based on new movies. If you could get the license to the Saw movies and make some new ones of that, that'd probably be the most video game based off of a horror movie that you could make. Otherwise, you're making things like off the Leprechaun series or Evil Bong series, which would be very ridiculous. Or you're moving very quickly and you're just like releasing a Terrifier game 2 years after a movie like Terrifier comes out, which would be dangerous in the sense that a Terrifier video game probably wouldn't sell particularly well, since Terrifier is probably not that well known. This somewhat newer thing, newer movie, and Terrifier is probably even a bad example of what I mean by that. It would be probably closer to something like making a game based on My Bloody Valentine or some other horror movie that people really aren't aware of. There's a lot of really small ones that people wouldn't know. this animation style is all over the place because they're using pre-made assets. That's another major problem with RPG Maker Unite or any RPG Maker software, is that you might be able to make a game that looks particularly good. This does look particularly good, but then you're going to the Unity asset store and getting very different animation styles here. Arguably this would look better if his arms were showing up and he were visible, but overall this doesn't look good, and clearly this character stands out as just being a totally different theme and visual theme as what you're seeing otherwise. We have about 5 more games. Here we have an adult game called the Beastmaster Princess, and this creates an odd question on diversity again. Let's ask that question first. Let me look at all this just to see if any of this is YouTube family unfriendly. Actually isn't. So here we have what I assume is an Egyptian lady who is technically African but more light-skinned. So that's a different kind of diversity. Then you have an elf lady. And then you have them kissing. Then you have another elf lady. The animation style is somewhat inconsistent here, in that you have this flatter animation style, and then you have more of a soft brush stroked animation style. This feels like this is done more in a computer, where this feels like this may have been done with an actual paintbrush. You have quite a variety of characters. Here we have a black lady, and you can see she's got black hair. Here you potentially have an albino African with brown hair, although if she was truly albino it would be white, so it's also possible she's just very light-skinned. Black. Let's see. So weirdly, we are really running into this situation where the adult games are actually incredibly diverse. This game here is selling for $13.49 and it's English only, and I question just how much mature content is actually in it. You can play the game with suggestive outfits and love scenes turned on or off depending on your preferences. The game contains descriptions of sexual acts and erotic scenes featuring nudity and genitals, which is a very bare explanation and probably all you really need. You can play as a male protagonist or a female protagonist, which that's actually a lot of options, frankly, for an adult game or in a game with adult content. Let's see. Showing off several different characters. If anything, it's English only, so this is still not really getting into the anime aspect. We really haven't seen a anime adult game, or even that many anime games in general today. But yeah, this feels like this is a real game that people have put real effort into. Now, noticeably, if I tried to make a YouTube short on this, my macro would just break because it wouldn't automatically go to this page. And if anything, this might be a great example of where the adult store is actually hiding a game that really should be more sold outside of the adult section. Like, depending on just how much dialogue is actually here. Like, this is the level of quality I'd like to see all adult games go to. We're really telling a story, we're letting you pick the gender of the main protagonist, we're I guess, incredibly diverse is a new goal. I also appreciate the idea of it being in the adult store and every screenshot not being just, well, straight up a butthole, as one of the screenshots was earlier for a different game. I wonder if this is supposed to be somewhat in line with the Beastmaster movie from, like, probably the 70s. Probably not. That would be a little weird. Next, we have a game called We Are Screwed. Let's see. Co-op space action game for 1 to 4 players. I don't think I really see anything here that's particularly interesting, so I'm gonna say no. I really don't have a lot of games today, do I, to make YouTube shorts off of, which is fine. There's well over 7 or 8 games that I do have to make YouTube shorts off of, so that's plenty for 2 days. Treasure Hunter VR doesn't look interesting. Now, it very possibly would be unfair to complain or claim that there's some censorship or bundling happening. Here you have another black lady with black hair being depicted in a flat 2D way. Because the Tokyo Game Show is just around the corner, I wouldn't be surprised if Japanese companies are not really trying to list games on Steam for the next while until the Tokyo Game Show happens. I wouldn't be surprised if they just hold back quite a bit until that, and then all of a sudden we potentially would see a whole bunch of new Japanese anime type games. It is also worth pointing out how weirdly synonymous the anime style is to Japanese games, in that there's almost no Japanese games being made or released that aren't in some way addressing that kind of anime style. Like, not at least in my mind. Maybe there are actually things like Forspoken is a great example. That's a Japanese game that is foregoing the anime style visually. Arguably, it didn't succeed doing that, but it's trying. This game Leap is already mixed, so I'm going to say no to that. Alright, now moving on to the GameDeveloper.com articles. Joe Twist is stepping down as the CEO of the UK video game trade body UKIE. Twist held the position for over a decade. I've never really heard of the UKIE. It's probably the equivalent of the ESRB in the United States. That being said, there's considerably fewer video game companies in the UK. Let's see, is there anything really to say here? They don't really have a replacement. She's going to become a CEO of the Music Trade Party, BPI, which, yeah, she's really just trading up to be a CEO of another pointless organization, probably. Well, I guess I'll just leave it at that. I don't know anything about her. I don't know anything about UKIE. If anything, I would say generally the UKIE, as far as a video game trade body for the United Kingdom, has done a fairly bad job in a lot of places. Let's just think this through. The push towards censorship in the UK is kind of bad. The censorship in Australia is incredibly awful, and the United Kingdom would include Australia. The amount of like censorship outside of London and England, but in like Scotland, Wales, and such, is kind of bad. The push towards censorship in Canada, I don't think is that bad. But hardly any place in the United Kingdom that I can think of is a bastion of free speech and promotion for video games, or in general for anything. And video games in general in the United Kingdom are not particularly thriving as being sold there, nor are they particularly thriving as being developed there. So, yeah, I think the nicest way to put it is more definitely could have been done in the past 10 years. Let's see, the Forspoken developer Luminous Production is being merged to Square Enix. Here's another example, though. Like, this is a black lady, isn't it? At least a tan lady. Even if it isn't a black lady, that definitely feels like black hair she's got. I think the guy's argument kind of falls apart, unless he specifically was meaning male black hair. But even in that, I'm not sure he's got a good argument. And if anything, it probably points out that you should think through your accusations before and set up a lot of examples before you throw it out there. And this accusation certainly that some game developers don't want to spend the time animating black hair very easily could become like a hashtag Twitter thing that people try to jump on and echo and agree with, but very possibly won't, because here today, in less than 3.5 hours, I've been able to hear this accusation and refute it by examples in AAA games, many examples in adult games, examples in just general single A games. The argument just did not hold water particularly well at all. We already talked about IOI expanding their slate. You definitely get into the weeds too when you have like, here's an elf character with white hair, but then it's all braided in what would be probably more of a African style braid. Do you count that, or do you not count that? EA lays off hundreds of QA works from the Baton Rouge office. Louisiana in particular probably has very little worker production in the United States. Yeah. I'll leave that article from GameDeveloper.com if you want to check that out. Nordic Games report reveals possible violations of the Swedish Discrimination Act. The actions of 2 workers at Nordic Games may have caused the company to violate the Swedish Discrimination Act. This is an interesting story. And an external investigation revealed that the event organizers may have violated the Swedish Discrimination Act. The external firm responsible for the report, Gender Balance, was brought on by Nordic Games to look into multiple allegations of sexual misconduct from April 2022. The allegations were made by multiple women against 2 men who reportedly represented the organization. Let's see. Gender Balance corroborated multiple allegations against the first man who left Nordic during the investigation. Has claimed that most of the first man's victims were in a position of personal or professional dependence to him. So he was like harassing them and hitting on them. It's further alleged that the first man's actions may have put Nordic in a violation of the SDA on section on prohibition against discrimination. Victims and witnesses all spoke against the alleged behavior, and the gender balance cited the evidence against him as, quote, overwhelming, so they couldn't even cover it up or deny it at this point. Nordic Games, being THQ Nordic, I assume. So yeah, what happened to the second guy? Speaking broadly, Gender Balance found that Nordic Games has a workplace culture that ranges from informal and friendly to unprofessional and inappropriate, which perhaps that range, even at informal and friendly, is too close for comfort. The two accused men, who were allegedly friends, created an environment with unclear professional boundaries. The allegations against the second man were unable to be corroborated. Like the first offender, according to the Gender Balance Act, his actions took place several years prior to the investigation, meaning there would be less witnesses remaining at Nordic Games. Citing no or very little textual evidence, Gender Balance said there is very few good investigative measures available. The few that were available invariably come to dead ends. Consequently, there are no corroborated claims against him too, I assume male too. Still, victims and those who filed the complaints found themselves losing trust in Nordic to handle the allegations against either man. Communication from Nordic was allegedly disjointed, and it claimed on many occasions the first man would threaten to sue victims for defamation. Gender Balance closed out its report by disclosing that it offered advice to Nordic Games on measures to take in order to decrease further risk and misconduct. Well, this is I imagine, a very professional response from Gender Balance, from bringing some professionalism into an industry that basically has no professionalism whatsoever. The part about it violating the Swedish Discrimination Act doesn't mean much to me as a foreigner. It doesn't really feel like the government is stepping in and doing anything when very possibly they should. That being said, Nordic Games very possibly will do nothing around this, or will just try and sweep it under the rug. There is certainly always an argument you can make on the other side that a company called Gender Balance is always going to find some guilt, but inherently Nordic Games would not bring in an external investigator unless they knew they were already guilty of it. It seems to me like this is something that went on for a very long time and had to come to a massive head, frankly, to have them actually act on it. April 22 is not that long ago, but the other guy seems to have done things several years earlier, and yeah, it definitely seems like bad behavior and the kind of things you don't want to have happen. And yeah, overall, I will just say that it sounds like there needs to be a lot more professionalism in the video game world in general. And until we have, we're almost certainly going to have more instances of this happen, and these kinds of incidences happening and coming to light more and more often, until some real adults come in, or some people start acting like real adults and stop treating it like they are frat boys in a fraternity doing things that even frat boys shouldn't be doing. Moving on, Destiny 2 reaches a new concurrent player high with the Lightfall release. What is the concurrent player high number? Let's see, 316,000 concurrent players, which beats the previous high of 290,000 when the Witch Queen came out. Okay. People still playing Destiny 2 when new content is put out, at least. The Communication Workers of America says that Activision Blizzard fired staff who lambasted the return to office policy. The CWA claims Activision Blizzard fired 2 employees for engaging in union activity and has filed an unfair labor practice charge against the publisher. Again, I bet Activision Blizzard did exactly that, and it will just be a matter now to see if the U.S. legal system, as far as worker protection and union protection, actually will protect them. Yeah. In general, the return to office policy is really, or these general return to office ideas where we need everybody to come back instead of remote working, is really highlighted as kind of a dumb idea in most scenarios when you compare it to also the fact that you have major unprofessionality and risk of employees harassing other employees. It's really, really hard to harass another employee over Skype when you know the Skype is being recorded and watched by other people too, which you should know that if you're on a business Skype call. It's not impossible to do that. What was that guy, Jeffrey Toobin from CNN, I think proved that, but or anybody who's used Chatterbait can prove that, certainly, but it's a lot more difficult, certainly, and it's way easier for somebody else to shut down the connection and disconnect if they're being harassed over a Skype call versus being cornered in a room, or at least it's easier to collect evidence. So yeah, I really think most businesses should try to be 100% remote. There's an update to this GameDeveloper.com article. A spokesman for Activision Blizzard has told Game Developer the publisher is disappointed in the CWA for filing the ULP charge and that it won't tolerate workplace harassment. We're disappointed in the union for filing a charge that sounds very legitimate and should be at least investigated. Unfair labor practice is ULP, and that it's not going to tolerate workplace harassment, which that has nothing to do with Activision Blizzard allegedly firing employees, being, quote, having a voice in the workplace doesn't mean having the right to abuse, harass, or use slurs against colleagues, end quote. Well, they said, we don't tolerate that kind of behavior and we are disappointed the CWA is advocating for that, end quote. This is an interesting counter accusation. Inherently, union members and unions are going to harass management because, I mean, it's just giving what they get. Management is going to try and harass employees, particularly in a union situation, and unions are going to try and harass management that are giving them trouble. Like, unless you just have a situation where the management and the union really are on good terms. They often claim they're on good terms, but they really aren't. And so I could see a union member easily calling a manager a scab, although technically that would be the wrong term. But I don't feel like that's really a slur that you could say. I could see you calling other colleagues scabs too. But yeah, that seems like the only thing I could even think as far as this response is that they're saying, oh, they said mean things, so that therefore we fired them. Not we fired them because they're union members and that they were upset about the return to office policy. It really is a response that just muddies the water and does not get to the heart of the matter as far as these employees were fired for this specific reason and it had nothing to do with unions. They're just implying that without actually saying it because they don't want to be held to whatever they say at this point. In general, yeah, if I was the management, I would not be firing people if for any way I thought the union was going to file an unfair labor charge, and almost certainly they are going to file that for almost every reason. And at a certain level, unions are run by their members, somewhat. So, if these union members were fired, and most of the other members of the union really doesn't support the filing of an unfair labor practice charge, the union, by its bylaws, tends to really have to still side with the two members. So, if it is the two members who got laid off who are pushing for the charge will happen. That's just how the union works. Is the union does everything it can to try to protect everybody it can. It doesn't pick and choose winners. It doesn't go, oh well, most of us in the union don't like this guy, but he is a union member, but screw him, we'll just let him get fired because we don't like him. It's not a popularity contest per se. Moving on, Meta has sold almost 20 million Quest headsets, which I don't think that really means much to me. Like, it's a big number. It ends in a zero, certainly, but I don't think at any point I would suggest getting a Meta Quest headset to anybody. Like, if you were going to get anything, get the PlayStation VR 2 or the HTC Vive. It might be really cheap at this point, but generally I'd say don't get any VR headset at all. Alright, moving on, well, we just have some fall list cleanup. We have a game called Cool Game that's mixed and irrelevant, so we'll get rid of that. Cooking Simulator VR. I'm going to leave this on the fall list even though it's a VR game. Cooking Companions is rated very positively. Let's see. Is this a visual novel or a Yeah, it's a visual novel and a psychological horror thing, so it's kind of one of these Doki Doki Literature Club type joke games. Alright, well, it follows the rules. It has way more than 30 reviews. It's very popular, so it goes to the wish list. Cooking, on the other hand, everything here is going to be called Cooking something. Is irrelevant, doesn't have enough reviews. It seems like it probably is a mix and match game where you add different ingredients to make different recipes, which is not the 8 menus are included in the game, each of which will accommodate 10 to 12 dishes accompanied by at least 200 ingredients. So it's a puzzle game, really, with 80 different puzzles. Which, yeah, that's an interesting thought, but I don't think that's relevant enough to want to play. Conway, disappearance of Delia View. Whatever. It's very positive, so it goes on the wish list. And this is kind of a great example of a game that I bet people really aren't familiar with. It's from the creators of The Occupation and Ether 1. Two other games I'm not really familiar with. Ether 1 and The Occupation, both on the wish list already. Contraband Police. This is coming out March 8th, so I'll give it more time. Construction Simulator. Do I want to play a game that's a construction simulator? Probably not, but it, again, follows the rules. So put it on the wish list. Conspiracy. Detective game. I think we can say no to that. And then Connect Tank. I think we probably can say no to that. 1 to 4 player game. It's more of a multiplayer focus, I bet. Connect. And what I'm going to do today is I'm going to skip the Duel Live and skip the looking at my Twitter feed for any new news. So there might be slightly more news on Friday, but we're already going along and I have to run to the bathroom. So this game is not quite polished enough for my interest. This SMU Guildhall sounds like it's a student project, but I'm not really sure it actually is getting published by a college. There's one of these publishers that sounds like a college but really isn't a college, from best as I can tell. Alright, well, I'm not even gonna bother to come back. That's gonna be it for this stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos. If you want to friend or follow me on any social media sites, there's a whole bunch of links down below. And if you want to support me further, there's a link to Patreon, or you can friend me on Steam and get me a game off my wish list. Thank you for watching. Have a good evening.